Chapter 46. Issue 46. Trials of Merlin Part 17. Spider Babe, Spider Gal, Spider Wife. 616 Peter was mumbling this while rubbing his chin. "What are you doing?" MJ asked with a curious expression. In response to her question, both of them looked at her and said, "Trying to think up a cool superhero name for you." "How about Spider-Woman?" MJ said. "Taken." Both of them said in unison. "Anyways, speaking of Spider-Woman, don't you think we should do something with her? If the Skrulls were impersonating her, then she wouldn't have any value to keeping her around." 616 Peter said, thinking that they lost a friend. Actually, the fact the Skrull was able to mimic her powers would suggest that she is still alive. "Peter, can you work with Tony and me to build a device that will scan your world's outer atmosphere for Skrull ships?" The older Spider-Man looked over to Tony, who was conversing with Steve. He thought of all the crap Tony had put him through and swallowed his anger and gripped his fists tightly. "I can," 616 Peter responded simply. Peter smiled and said, "Good. So Strange, can you help me replicate this spell matrix?" Peter held up his hand and a glowing white magic circle appeared above his hand. Strange stared at it in astonishment. "Incredible, you actually took a scientific route for your spellcraft and succeeded?" 616 Peter then said, "Wait, why is that so important?" Strange looked to Peter and said, "I can see why the Merlin stones chose you now. Did you know that you weren't the first to take this path? It was actually Merlin was the first tried to mix science and magic. And from what I've read, it wasn't nearly as advanced as you made it." Strange looked to Peter's 616 universe counterpart and said, "Your other self here didn't just make his own way of casting spells. He created a form of spellcraft that specializes in making magical items anyone can use. So, can you help me make a couple of components for the machine we need to build?" Peter questioned. Strange looked at the matrix and said, "It would take us all night to build this." Peter then turned to Tony and shouted, "Hey Tin Can!" Iron Man looked over to Peter. Having been informed of his history by Steve, he realized that he was actually here to help. "What is it, kid?" Peter held out his hand and used a simple light hologram spell to show his schematics for a worldwide Skrull scanner. Tony looked over and nodded his head. "It's solid work, but wouldn't it be better if you altered the coding like this?" Tony imputed some data and used a hologram projector of his own. This way the scan will reach the far side of the moon. 616 Peter then said, "Couldn't we set this up to create a worldwide EMP, Tony? This too dangerous. You need to add safety precautions. Are you trying to send us back to the Stone Age?" "Good catch, Pete. I almost missed it." Tony looked at 616 Peter and sighed. "Look, I'm sorry, Peter. I know I asked a lot from you, but nothing, Stark. I trusted you when you told me that no one would get hurt, and you betrayed that trust. I don't know if we can be friends again, but for now I'm willing to put up with you for the greater good." 616 Peter responded, clenching his fist to fight off his frustrations. Aunt May grabbed his arm and said, "I'm okay now, Peter." Peter placed his hand on his counterpart and said, "I know what Tony did was messed up, but his heart was in the right place." Peter then glared at Tony. "You didn't prepare for any of this. You just opened the package and started building without reading the instructions first. Head first into the fire, like always." "I don't think that's fair." Tony looked away. "Fair?" 616 shouted. "If you had prepared even a portion of the security you protect your company assets with to someone you're expecting to unmask, would my aunt have been shot? The Hero Registration Act wasn't a bad idea, but you went in without a proper plan, and you lied to me about that, Tony. You said they'd be protected. You fucking rushed Job the whole thing." Prime Peter took a breath and finished by saying, "You're a grown-ass man. Maybe next time before you start a world conflict, you ask for help in preparing everyone for this, so every family is taken care of, and no hero has to worry about their identity being found out by their villains." "I don't think I've been scolded like that since my dad," Tony reacted with a look of shame. "Well, I feel like I got a chip off MY's shoulder. Now let's get to work. Those Skrulls aren't going to defeat themselves," Peter said as he nudged his older self while they headed towards Tony's lab. "My shoulder. 'Cause we're both the same person." "I get it," 616 chuckled. While the Avengers worked through their issues, the Spider Heroes mostly spent their time working together on the device. Tony and Cap managed to work through their problems and agree on a method to stop their fighting. Steve Rogers would be the sole owner of the list of hero identities, and only one person at a time would ever be allowed access to the documents. In the event of his death, a single person will inherit the title and responsibilities that come with it, so the current owner must find a successor once they take up the job. Peter was working alongside his counterpart with glee when MJ came in the room walking on the roof using the suit Peter gave her. As she landed, she wrapped her arms around her husband and said, "You know, I think I get it now, why you do what you do. Honestly, if I had this kind of power, naturally I'd have to act. I can see why you can't sit still when someone's in danger. 616 Peter grabbed her hand and said, I'm just glad you have something to protect yourself with. Peter looked at them and laughed when MJ asked, So why did you develop this suit? It seems kind of odd for you just to have one laying about like that. I actually made it in case I lose my powers or symbiote. Peter looked to his counterpart and said, After all, it wouldn't be the first timeline it has happened in. No harm in being prepared. How many realities have you traveled? 616 Peter asked, I know about a few dozen or so, but I've only visited 2, excluding my own. Why are you here? MJ asked. A test from the Merlin Stones. Even I don't know why I'm here yet, so I just decided to be the hero I am and help out, since I have nothing better to do, Peter replied as he stuck his head into the contraption they were building. Using his powers, he massively cut down on the build time. So how do you have all these powers? 616 Peter asked. The younger counterpart laughed. I told you losing Venom was your biggest mistake. It copied your powers, why wouldn't it be able to copy other powers as well? Peter then pulled a miniature version of the symbiote's head out the suit and said, This is Webster, my parents made him, and I used strange magic to educate and impart my spirit and life experiences into it. Essentially, I let it live a life believing it was Peter Parker using my own memories as a catalyst to help it understand human morals and behaviors. Interesting methods. But do you wipe their previous memories? No, mine hadn't bonded to anyone, so it was blank. It wouldn't wipe a sentient being's memories. Well, not unless they deserve it. So the difference is in my universe they're aliens. 616 rubbed his chin. Bingo! Oh, and thanks to someone from another universe bringing in one of the alien symbiotes to my universe, we discovered that this teaching method works on them as well. So, if you get a chance to confront Venom again, you should try to make up. But Prime Peter looked to MJ, to which she smiled and said, As long as you don't bring home a monster, then I don't mind. 616 Peter then hugged her as he gave her a kiss and then turned to Peter who was manipulating metal into the shell of the satellites they would be launching. Still really impressive though. Tony came back in to see how much work had been done and was surprised as he commented, Wow! With this much done, it should only take a few hours to finish the rest. Peter then walked over to Strange. The rest is on you two for the mechanical aspect. Strange and I will take care of the magical components. 616 Peter and Tony looked at each other. Tony still feeling guilt over May getting wounded, and not being able to help because of bullshit political reasons when he knew he should just push that crap aside and do the right thing. 616 Peter was doing everything he could to not bop Tony upside the head. He couldn't help but think of May getting shot every time he looked at him, but he chose to try and look past that. After all, it was his choice to remove his mask, so he wouldn't shy away from the responsibility that he shared for causing the incident. The two both sighed and held out their hand. One more chance? Tony asked. One more time, I'm going to trust you one more time. 616 Peter shook his hand and the two started working. I still can't believe he managed to make all the components by hand. Even managed to make all the circuits and routers, down to the smallest detail. Tony looked at the young Peter Parker and said, He's got a lot of talent, feeling a little jealous? 616 Peter smiled and said, Maybe a little disappointed in myself for wasting my potential. After all, if he able to do so much at his age, then what have I been doing all this time? I mean, do you know how long I've put off getting my bachelor's degree? I like teaching, but I'd like to do something more with my life as Peter Parker. Heck, maybe I'll ask Strange to teach me some magic too. Tony lifted a brow. Well, you're certainly smart enough to graduate college altogether, but what are you going to do about work? 616 Peter looked at Tony and said, Well, I'm not working for you again. Maybe I'll see if the Baxter building will put up with me. As the two started to get to work, Peter and Strange began creating the spell matrix for the scan spell. I still can't believe you managed to turn a simple spark spell into a spell matrix that would only need electricity to power it. Hey, I couldn't have achieved this without your guidance, Peter commented, making Dr. Strange smile with a bit of pride. The four of them worked tirelessly throughout the night. Tony and 616 Peter insisted on making constant improvements to the scanner's capability, so by the time they finished it, the device had increased its range from the dark side of the moon to the entire length of their solar system. Peter was sitting on the roof of Avengers Tower and staring into the sky. After geeking out with his heroes and accomplishing a childhood dream, he decided to take a break. He had to admit, this world's heroes are far smarter than in his, and was far more experienced too. Peter sighed as he thought, Why did the Merlin stones bring me here? What is it that I'm supposed to do? Sometimes the answers will just come to you. It may take time, so you should just continue to do what you think is best, Strange said as he appeared beside the young hero. Peter, Captain America has called for you all, Jarvis rang over the comms. Peter got up and followed him into the large living room where everyone was gathered in and shook Cap's hand. Thank you for joining us, Parker. Is it okay if I call you that? Calling two people Peter is a little confusion. Sure, Steve, and I understand. Why do you think I call Steven by his last name? Peter said while pointing to Strange. As the wayward hero sat down, Captain America looked around at those sitting beside him and said, Listen up everyone, Tony and I have come to an agreement. If you all trust me, then at the next announcement about the bill being passed, Tony will announce me as the one to handle your identities and only me. With this, you can keep your identities a secret, and still work as superheroes, with the exception of only me knowing. Everyone started discussing the situation when Power Man stood up and said, Cap, the whole reason we started this is because the government was asking for too much and pushing their authority and business into our personal lives. If you're in charge of the registration, we know you won't abuse it and bring harm to us because you've been dealing with this stuff far longer than any of us. Iron Fist stood up next to him. I have to agree with Luke, you've seen the best of times, and the worst, Captain. If there was one man I trusted with my name, then it is you. Everyone started to speak similar remarks when Steve started to smile. He once again felt the warmth of comradeship that he did before with his fellow Avengers and admitted that it felt good for some semblance of it to be back. The star-spangled hero then turned to Peter and said, Thanks to this visitor, we managed to avoid a worst-case scenario. Tony and I have been trying to interrogate the prisoner for hours now, but she won't crack. An Avenger of ours has been kidnapped and is being held somewhere against her will. Our planet has been invaded by Skrulls and we haven't even noticed. Thanks to the combined efforts of these four, we've managed to make a global scanning device. Universal scanning device. Tony corrected. Sorry, universal scanning device. We've also made multiple portable scanners as well. Cap then threw out a pair of glasses to Hawkeye. Put them on. As Clint put on the glasses, he noticed a very computer-esque style visual effect as a circle hovered over the faces of everyone, revealing them as human. Clint then passed them around so everyone could see. When the last one confirmed that they were all human, they breathed a sigh of relief. As you can see, everyone here can be trusted. I think an honorable start to reforming the Avengers would be stopping an alien invasion, don't you? Captain America asked, rallying the heroes into action as they cheered. Chapter 47, Issue 47, Trials of Merlin Part 18. Captain America smiled. He listened to their cheers and waited until the room calmed down before saying, We start the scan tonight. At the crack of dawn tomorrow, we hunt down every last Skrulls and end this war before it ever begins. Everyone cheered louder as Peter left the area. He headed up to the room Tony had assigned him to and stared at the ceiling. He was stumped on trying to think of why the gemstones sent him here. I know it has something to do with time and space. Think, Parker, think. Is there something special about this moment in history? Perhaps something to do with me altering history. Peter scrambled his brains that night and didn't sleep at all, so instead, to take his mind off of the whole ordeal, he decided to craft another suit for his counterpart. That way he would be more helpful in the battle to come. After he finished the suit, he went back to trying to solve his problem. Peter was starting to feel like he was losing it after staring at the ceiling for an hour, when he suddenly thought of something. He jumped out of bed and started to head towards the confinement chamber that Tony made for the Skrull Queen. As he snuck into the room, he saw a single 6-foot-tall and 4-feet-wide pod made out of proto-adamantium, with a transparent hard light shielding that acted like a glass window. On the other side was the queen of an entire alien species. Peter tapped on the prison cell. However, she gave no reaction to his attempts to gain her attention. Hey, I know you can hear me, Peter said, standing in front of her. The queen feigned ignorance, leaving the room in silence. That was until Peter said, Tell me, Queen Verank, tell me about the prophecy your people had. The queen's eyes twitched. I know somehow, someway your people once had a prophet, and that he or she predicted the death of your world. I want you to tell me the exact words. The queen opened her eyes. How do you know so much? You first, Peter responded. The queen frowned and said, Do not dare to presume you can talk to me in this manner of speaking, you insect. I am a queen, and you are a lowly bug. Peter's temperament turned cold. He didn't want to resort to this, but the Queen Skrull left him no choice as he said, Do you know what it feels like to have your molecules ripped apart atom by atom? Peter briefly activated the power ruby and channeled it into his magnetic control. Only by using the Merlin gem was he currently able to forcefully activate this ability. The Skrull Queen looked on in horror as her fingers started to evaporate into dust. She screamed out in pain. Peter slowed the processes of her disintegration as much as he could, then shouted, Now tell me your prophet's words. The queen tried to start talking, only able to make out few words before Peter stopped using his power. In a time before the Skrull conquer the Andromeda Galaxy. Peter stopped using the power ruby when she fell over and started panting heavily before continuing. A herald of destruction will visit our home world and destroy the majority of the Skrull race, and our right to rule the universe will be lost. But a blue planet of the soul in the Milky Way shall be our salvation. That's it. Peter rose his hand up, making the Queen almost shrill back. That is all. I swear. Not what I was looking for. Peter frowned as he thought about the implications of such a thing. He then looked to Varank and said, You stupid shallow-minded morons. The god of the Skrulls would be ashamed of what your people have become. Mere harvesters of worlds that leave nothing of terror, death, and destruction in your wake. Did you know the reason that the original Skrull Eternal and your blood ancestors only became gods was because they were compassionate people and met the criteria of the Celestials' requirements? The Queen looked at him in disbelief and responded, You can't possibly know of such things. We Skrull have no such gods, and there remains no record of such things. The saddest part is that you misinterpreted your own prophecy. Earth could have indeed been your salvation, but not like this. If you had come in peace instead of out of conquest, then your people would have welcomed. As a matter of fact, you don't know it, but there are species on this planet that could terraform entire new planets for the Skrull to live on. Not to mention there are plenty of worlds floating in the infinity of space that could be terraformed with ease. Oh, and let's not forget the countless worlds that exist out there that would accept your people if you all didn't slaughter 80% of the Andromeda Galaxy's life forms. Peter looked at her in disappointment before he said, Let me tell you something that's going to happen because of your evil ways. Your entire armada will be wiped out. Peter then placed his hand out and pointed to himself as he continued. And I personally will be on the front lines against the assault towards your current base world. Normally I would choose for peace over war and spare your people from tragedy, but for sick warmongering fucks like yourselves, only death on a large scale will make you fear the Earth, and unfortunately for you, the Skrulls will become nothing more than a warning sign to the rest of the alien species eyeing this world. For the first time since the destruction of her world did the Queen felt fear. You think you are powerful, we have the Super Skrull, you are no match for him, no one on this Earth is. The Queen reputed, trying to rally her confidence. If I see that bastard KLRT, I'll kill him myself. Since I know firsthand what will happen should he survive this event, my consciousness would never be at rest thinking of all the innocent lives he will take. Peter then looked deeply into her eyes and said, To you, he may be the strongest Skrull, but to me, I think he'll only barely manage to give me a challenge. That's only if I don't use my ace in the hole. Peter's statement made the Queen go wide-eyed. Who are you? Just a man moving through space and time, a singularity of unknown origin. Suddenly Peter felt something pulling on him. There was no one there, but he could feel it nonetheless, like a string wrapped around his head. A pivotal moment that decided the futures of countless beings, Peter thought as he turned around and walked away. A moment where all of time and space will diverge into countless futures. Peter then returned to his room and laid on the bed. What is it that I need to see? He didn't know what it was just yet, but he felt like there was a paper-thin wall between him and the answers. He decided to get some sleep. However, that didn't last long, as he only got a few hours of sleep before Tony's message came over an intercom waking everyone up. Well, it's been a while since I could say this. Avengers assembled to the war room. Everyone marched up together and stood in a room around a large holographic projection table. An image of the globe appeared showing thousands of red and green dots on it. Steve stood in front of everyone and said, Last night, Jarvis contacted every known hero across the world and sent them a listing of Skrull spies. The identities of every person they have ever impersonated was discovered thanks to the satellite photos and Jarvis's hacking skills. Tony then clapped his hands together as he said, On top of that, we've discovered 4 spots of Skrull life forms bunched together circling the Earth's exosphere. We need to make a single group of Avengers to take on one of the ships. SHIELD, SWORD, and STRIKE will be sending their most powerful squads to take out the remaining 3. Stephen placed his shield on his back and said, Listen up, the attack has to be timed perfectly. This is a worldwide blitzkrieg assault. We hit them hard, and we hit them fast. Before they even have a chance to notice us coming. This isn't just for the Avengers. It's not about our issues or needs. This mission is for the protection of our very world. For the first time in humanity, all the nations are working together as one, and every innocent life taking up residence on this planet is counting on our success. Stephen then looked to the 2 Peter Parkers and said, So no pressure, right? The room was quiet until the 616 Peter said, Did Cap just make a joke? Peter started laughing, making all the tension that they had built up vanish in an instant. Everyone else joined in on the joke when young Parker said, Just another day at the office. As Luke stood up and cracked his knuckles he asked, So who's going to space? The Parker twins, Dr. Strange, and Tony will be heading up to one of the spaceships since their powers and specialties work best in space. Everyone else is with me on ground force duty. It's our job to get rid of every last Skrull on Earth. Everyone nodded their heads when MJ walked up wearing her suit. I'm coming too. 616 Peter almost fell over and stepped in front of her as he said, No, you're not. MJ looked to him again and said, I know how to fight, Peter. You know I started taking self-defense classes after we started dating, and have continued to even till this day. You knowing how to fight isn't the problem, MJ. This is a war, you'll have to, look please for me, just this once, stay here and look after Aunt May for me. I promise that as soon as I come back we'll go out and be superheroes together and kick all sorts of bad guy butt, but until then, please stay here, 616 Peter pleaded. MJ pouted and then said, Fine, just this once, Tiger, but you have to keep your promise. Everyone else was prepping for combat when the space assault team was led into one of Tony's spaceships. After activating the cloaking device on it, they took off headed out of the Earth atmosphere. Reaching space and feeling the sense of weightlessness, everyone began to wait outside their intended target with strange feelings. Some excited, others worried they'd be sent flying into the void. They had 2 hours until the mission began, and it passed by at an agonizingly slow pace. As the seconds passed, they talked about a few things to pass the time. Tony had a lot of questions about his counterpart. I'm a genius over there too, huh? I guess no matter which universe you visit, I would have to be one. Peter rolled his eyes. You're all just as cocky at least. Tony's aide, I gave him a heads up, warning him that it was getting down to minutes until the assault. When the timer hit 0, he knew it was time for them to board the ship. Just before they exited, Peter turned to his 616 counterpart and said, I almost forgot. Young Peter pulled out a copy of the classic design and handed it over to 616 Peter. I made another one last night. You wanted a cool suit too, right? You're giving this to me this now? 616 Peter said with a mixture of happiness and annoyance. If you don't want it. 616 Peter grabbed the suit and said, Now what kind of man would I be if I turned down such a great gift? From myself. 616 quickly changed before he suddenly felt the magic properties of the suit empower his spider abilities. Wow. It feels just like the symbiote, minus the additional voice in my head. They all had a quick chuckle as they began to board the alien spacecraft. They entered through a trash chute and ended up inside the ship's air ducts. Tony was busy scanning the ship while the Spider-Men keep a lookout, focusing on using their spider senses to keep watch. Strange cloaked their presence from all of their security scans and maintained the spell with ease as they made their way deeper into the ship's internal structure. Tony had just finished scanning the entire ship when he almost shouted, This is strange, no pun intended. Sure, Dr. Strange rolled his eyes. Get on with, Tony. Quit with all the suspense, Peter groaned. He looked to everyone and pulled up the ship schematics. I'm reading human signatures, hundreds of them. Chapter 48, Issue 48, Trials of Merlin Part 19. Tony led them to a large lab room where there were Skrull scientists examining hundreds of missing heroes and human citizens. Most of them were stored in pods full of some kind of stasis liquid. New plan, Tony said looking at the timer inside his armor's HUD. 15 minutes until the attack begins. Just enough time to hack the Skrull's computer systems, specifically the teleporter. Peter then asked, Tony, where are you going to put them? There are almost 500 people here. If the numbers are more or less the same in the other ships, then we're looking at around 2,000 people. And not all from the same country. I was thinking of using a football stadium, lots of space, and we can contain everyone so that we can return them to their homes at a later time, Tony said as he finally hacked into the ship's teleporting functions. Sweet, we got lucky. The Skrull's mothership computer systems are all connected to the rest. Let's set it up so that the moment the timer reached 0, the captives would all be sent back down to Earth together. I'll notify Jarvis to travel there and take care of the getting everyone home situation. After Tony finished setting up his trap, they then traveled their way up to the bridge and got ready to begin their assault. As the timer reached 0, the virus Tony planted in the ship activated the teleportation protocol and sent all their captives back to Earth. While the Skrull commanders tried to make sense of what was happening, the group busted in and started taking out their foes. The Spider-Men jumped over and webbed every last Skrull in sight, and since Tony's weapons could damage the bridge, he had to resort to melee combat only, making his just slightly less dangerous than usual. Strange spells kept everyone from being seen, so it was like an invisible whirlwind of destruction as they moved throughout the bridge's personnel. After a few minutes, Peter activated his communication set and said, Avengers reporting in, Alpha target captured. Everyone then received similar callbacks. This is SHIELD, Beta target secured. SWORD target Gamma in check. Reporting from STRIKE. Delta target is under our control. Alright, now let's send the targets out of the hatch. Tony was about to purge the ship when Peter said, Wait, we don't need to kill them. Tony lifted a brow and said, That's not what you said last night during your little conversation with the Skrull Queen. Tony then pulled up the video of what happened. 616 Peter looked at his counterpart with a bit of a disturbed expression. What? Yes, I tortured her, but this is war, Peter. You can't be nice to your opposition. Besides, she can heal from that kind of damage without any problem. All that stuff about me killing her and her people was mostly a bluff to rile her up. There are times when you should at least learn to act the part. People won't learn their lessons if you just keep slapping them on the wrist. Then why did you say that in such a cruel way? 616 Peter asked. People don't change easily, and normally, I'd prefer the more peaceful approach, but since we're short on time and every second counts, fearing us is a good start. If we are able to make the entire Skrull race fear Earth's forces, then do you think the Kree or any other big-time evil alien overlords will come to try and conquer our home anytime soon? Even if they do, it would at least give them some pause. Then what did you mean by mostly a bluff? Tony asked. The Super Skrull has to die. If he survives this event, then trillions of life forms all across the galaxy will be lost, including countless Earthlings as well. He will team up with Thanos and help him acquire a cosmic cube. A huge battle will take place over the Earth, and as a result, the cosmic cube will be fractured and end up in the hands of the Red Skull, who will in return create an evil Steve Rogers copy that was a Hydra agent from the start, once again sending everyone back into this stupid Civil War BS. Peter then looked to everyone as he finished. If you knew this was going to happen, would you kill? I'm not talking 1 or 2 lives, Peter, but countless of them. 616 Peter then looked at his hands and then around at them before staring back at his counterpart and saying, But does it have to be you? You're just a kid. He's right, you know, it doesn't have to be you. Tony replied. Peter then smiled as he said, Tony, I've already fought in an invasion war before, and I've killed Chitauri during that time as well. Me choosing to kill the Super Skrull is my mercy towards the rest of the Skrull race, and it will avoid an all-out war. Peter then began to divulge his plan. The Skrulls see him as an idol to worship, almost like a god, and if that god falls, then the rest of the Skrulls will lose confidence in the underlying principle that their entire empire is built on. They all think that they are the most supreme beings across all universes. These Skrulls don't think of humans like people at all. If you don't become their slaves, then they will kill off your entire race and steal your planet. Peter didn't know where this confidence towards his prediction was coming from. It was like he could see the road being paved as he talked about it. Is this some kind of effect of the time Opal has on my spider sense? He thought to himself. Peter then turned to Tony and said, So if you're done testing me, would you please send the Skrull to the prison I know you've prepared for them? Tony laughed. Smartass kid. He activated the ship's teleportation protocol and transported every last Skrull into the phantom prison he designed with Reed Richards. Peter moved over to the ship's navigation center and said, Okay guys, this is where you get off. Everyone flinched at Peter as he placed his hand over the console and began using his symbiote to hack into the system. Within seconds, the symbiote powered with an overpowered supercomputer broke into the system to locate the Skrull's current based world. Peter, what are you doing? Tony noticed that he lost control of the ship's functions. Sending a message. Peter responded as he teleported everyone but him back to the Earth's surface using the ship's functions. Peter then sent the ship flying towards the Skrull home world. It would take him a day's travel to reach the planet, and during this time he began to study the ship's technology with great interest. Back on Earth, the 616 Peter Parker and company had been transported to the top of Avengers Tower. Peter slammed his fist on the ground and shouted, Damn it! That me? Damn me! Strange tapped him on the shoulder and said, He walks a different path than you. Look up, Peter, your city needs you. As he did, Peter saw the city in breaking out into chaos. Skrulls everywhere had their identities ousted and chose to retaliate against their arrests. They were attacking everything in sight. 616 Peter stood up and gripped his fists tightly. Come on guys, the Avengers' work isn't done yet. He looked up into the sky and said, You better come back safe. The group then sprang into action. They were joined alongside their fellow Avengers and began to thoroughly stomp down this invasion. It took them several hours on non-stop combat to finally quell the war that had begun, and thanks to 616 Peter's power being augmented by the magic of the suit, he managed to subdue a great portion of the invading force almost by himself. His arrest count was so much higher than most that Iron Man begged to let him take a look at the suit when they were done. Oh no, Tony, this is property of the Parker family. I don't care if it was me from another universe. What's Parker's will stay Parker's. Peter replied as he webbed up a group of Skrulls and suffocated them until they passed out. After moving the webbing aside and letting the Skrull breathe again, he looked back towards the sky and said, Still, I hope he doesn't have to kill. Back on the ship, Peter had spread out his symbiote along the entirety of the spaceship's infrastructure and said, Wow! I can really take control of the whole thing. Webster, you're amazing. Thank you, Peter. Is there anything else? Webster asked in response. Yes, begin the conversion, Peter said as the ship started to rearrange its shape into a more Earth-like construct, boasting the size of 5 helicarriers combined and the living space that could support up to 5,000 people. Peter was quite happy with what he nabbed. He focused all the weapons on this ship and turned them into parts that could enhance his shielding and self-sustaining components to be added at a later time. Peter laughed a little as he said, I think I'll keep this ship in my bag of infinite space when I'm done with this. Realizing he had a lot of time to himself, the hero sat at the bridge while looking out into the vastness of space. The day passed by quickly, and he could feel that connection between him and the gemstones were leading him on as he approached the planet. When he broke through the atmosphere of the alien world, a group of flagships belonging to the royal family approached his ship. Stand down, you are entering unauthorized space. If you proceed, then we will have to shoot you down. Peter raised his hands and started crushing the ships with his metal control, and made them nothing more than paperweights flying in the sky as he carried them to the front of the largest structure on the planet. There was massive golden castle-like structure shot into the sky, showing the full might of the Skrull race and their technological prowess. Peter walked out onto the deck of his new ship and stared across the army of approaching Skrulls, ships, platoons, and armadas of machines that surrounded him. Peter then swiped his hands, causing every piece of metal, and the very weapons they carried, to all be crushed into scrapped trash. He floated down and surprised everyone as his ship disappeared into his bag of infinite space. Walking straight towards the royal chamber's entrance, Spider-Man made sure every person who tried to stop them was webbed up like a fly and stuck to the ground or walls. With his goal in front of him, he walked over to the large golden doors and kicked them down. Peter came into an audience room that was surrounded by Skrull politicians and a single elderly Skrull who was wearing a fancy robe and sitting on the throne. Who dares to interrupt our council? Doruk the Seven shouted. Peter then walked up to the throne chair and said, An Earthling that doesn't care for your invasion. Doruk looked over Spider-Man and said, What nonsense is this? Your stupid invasion force has failed to capture our planet, and now you're suffering the consequences. Peter webbed Doruk and pulled him over to the ground and stuck his foot over his face before shouting, Bring out the one you call KLRT. The Royal Guard tried to make their move but was webbed up by Peter's organic webbing and stuck together. Everyone gasped because they couldn't understand what was going on, or how a mere human could be so powerful and know of the existence of their greatest weapon. You fool, you dare to challenge the Super Skrull. Doruk shouted, making Peter push down on his face, making a few cracking noises as the Skrull's face sank deeper into the ground. Yes, I came here specifically to end his life. Peter could feel that space and time starting to split away from the reality that surrounded him. It was as if he was watching a tree grow a new branch. A mere human dares to make a ruckus on my world? A deep and powerful voice echoed throughout the chamber, as the crowd started cheering that their superhero had arrived. The Super Skrull is here. Now you will know true suffering, filthy human. We will invade your planet and force you to watch as we drown the earth in human blood, and your closest family and friends are executed in front of the whole society. You will crawl at our feet and worship us or perish like the rest of the worlds that we have conquered. Doruk screamed in laughter. Peter then threw Doruk onto the wall and webbed him up so he could watch what he was about to do. So you're the Super Skrull, I'm not impressed. Chapter 49, Issue 49, Trials of Merlin Part 20. KLRT was 7.4 feet tall and built like a 400-pound professional bodybuilder. In comparison to Peter, he looked like a giant. He walked up to Spider-Man and attempted to reach out and grab his head. However, Peter placed his hand out and grabbed his hand first. Without much effort, the hero easily held the fake alien god in place before saying, I wonder how strong you really are? The Super Skrull grunted as he found out he couldn't move his hand. No matter how much strength he used, it wasn't enough. I can't copy your abilities? KLRT said with a thick layer of confusion in his voice. Of course, he couldn't. The Super Skrull would at least need to access Peter's genetics through touch, but thanks to the symbiote who was a far better gene manipulator, he couldn't as so much take a peek at his abilities. Peter clenched his fist, causing the Super Skrull to cry out in pain as his hand was broken. However, it wasn't for long. After healing his hand, the wannabe Skrull god looked to Peter and covered his fists the same material Ben Grimm's skin was made of. Perish! He shouted while punching at Spider-Man, who in turn, punched back. The two met with their fists sending shockwaves throughout the room, knocking over those watching and destroying the throne room's decorations. While the two exchanged fist, Peter had to admit, the Skrull was well trained in combat, but even with his years of experience and technique, he was no match for Peter's spider sense. Every time the Super Skrull attacked, he would dodge it within inches of the blow and land a counter-punch on his foe's body, hitting him dozens of times before he could even throw another. Exchange after exchange occurred as Peter countered every punch with dozen of his own, making the Super Skrull look inept at combat. Almost like a toddler trying to attack a fully grown bear. Peter could feel that he was using an invisible barrier around his body to dampen the blows. However, even with that aiding his defense, it wasn't enough. Every time the Skrull increased the density of his shield, Peter would use just a little more strength to break through them. After thoroughly embarrassing him in combat, Peter smirked and said, "Oh, what's the matter, big guy? Why are you so angry? You need a nap?" Peter then punched him through the wall, sending him flying out into the public eye, and similar to Earth's, the Skrulls had their own form of news media that hopped on the hot story. Within minutes, word began to spread and video footage of what was happening became viral. Peter began casting a spell that projected their image all across the planet as he shouted, "Greetings to the entire Skrull race. Some time ago you people attempted to invade and steal away my planet." The Super Skrull came flying back at him using the full power of the Fantastic Four combined. He punched out with a single stretching fist made molten magma and stone. However, the Skrull's real attack was hidden. He shapeshifted into having multiple arms and kept them hidden through the use of Sue's power, all to try and get one over on Spider-Man. Peter smiled as he dodged all of his attacks, even the dozen pair of invisible arms, and he did it all with his eyes closed. While in shock over his string of failures, Spider-Man webbed the Skrull's chest before pulling him to the ground. "How?" KLRT shouted as Peter smirked and pulled him over towards him. Without saying a word, Spider-Man began pummeling his face in with repeated punches and kicks. The Super Skrull tried to defend using layered invisible barriers, but Peter's magnetic field broke them down and easily passed right through them. With every attack landed, bones and blood sprayed across the onlookers. You go from world to world instigating tragedies that leave nothing but senseless slaughter in your wake. Peter hit KLRT in the chin, making his teeth fly out. 'Cause the deaths of so many innocent people just trying to live out their lives. A punch to his gut made him keel over and spew green blood out of his mouth. Not even the children are spared from your madness. How would you feel if you were in their shoes? Should I inflict the same pain upon your race so you can experience it firsthand? As he said these words, he grabbed the Super Skrull's head and kicked him in the chin, making the public go into a panic. As KLRT's face collapsed in on itself, Peter then kicked KLRT so hard in the groin it sent him flying into the air. Your people have wasted your potential by becoming what you are today. If you had chosen to use your gifts and knowledge for good, would any of this occurred? If you had taught and acted as friends or allies, would the countless lives you've already slaughtered have lived up to something given enough time and patience? You could have been teachers, kind and loving people who spread prosperity across your galaxy. KLRT came back with a furious expression the Skrull populace had never seen before. His body started growing until it reached 30 feet. His skin cracked and took on the forms of Ben Grimm and Johnny Storm, resulting in what looked like skin that rivers of magma flowing through it. And to top it off, the Super Skrull shaped out millions of invisible smaller molten fists out of his flesh and shot it towards Peter. By combining fire, electricity, and magnetism, Peter created a massive railgun that shot a giant hole through the Super Skrull's gut while destroying all his arms. He then punched the giant KLRT right in his chin, sending tumbling back into a few buildings. The hole in his body started to recover very slowly and shrink back to normal size. The regenerating of his body slowed immensely because of how powerful an attack the electro railgun was. The sheer energy attacking his very cells was taking everything he had to heal. Peter then webbed and pulled over the Super Skrull's battered body before he continued speaking. If your race does not change its ways and repent for all the evil you have done, then your fate shall the same as his, because Earthlings are not weak, they are not stupid, nor are they your playthings to experiment with. We are the same as you, we feel emotions, bleed and get wounded, we grow old and die, all the while desiring to live as free people. Peter could feel the timelines diverging as if he could see the multitude of futures appearing once he killed the Super Skrull. Peter could see the lives he would save, the families that would grow up making an infinite number of realities through their choices. Then he saw this world split into factions from the Skrull race, leading to a new ruler, a Kinder ruler. All he would have to do is kill him. Peter raised his hand ready to activate the power gem and disintegrate the Super Skrull into nothing when he stopped. The image of Thanos snapping away countless lives overlapped with his own image and made him freak out. "What the hell is wrong with me?" Peter said, staring at the scene before him. Can I really do this? Murder someone in cold blood? Is this really my choice, what I want?" Peter looked at the citizens of the Skrull planet and saw their terrified faces. The young, the old and everyone in between. Even if I pick this future, will it be my own? Suddenly a radiant orange and violet energy surrounded him. "I won't let my power consume me. I won't choose a future that has been shown before me. I'll write my own." Suddenly a new branch in time and space sprouted solely through the efforts of his actions. Not something that was not shown to him, but something he created. As the time opal and the space amethyst appeared on his suit's back, spider next to the power ruby, Webster announced. Time and space modes activated, 1 minute of usable energy. Peter used the power from the Merlin to turn the Super Skrull into baby Super Skrull. He then teleported said Skrull to an alien world that was full of strife and desperately needed a hero. It was only a matter of time until a loving family would find and raise him. One day, when he would inhabit the true ideals of a hero, he would save that world, leading it to salvation before returning to the cosmos in order to seek out his origin. To everyone watching, it looked like he had de-aged him out of existence. Shivers went down their spines as he stared at them. I did not wish for this, but you have brought this upon yourself. If you want to survive, then you must change. Peter then teleported away, leaving the whole Skrull world reeling from shock. Some people even began to think that he was the true god of destruction foretold in their prophecies. Even the king of their people had felt true despair. They had lost their champion, and every race they conquered would soon find out about it. The future of the Skrull race had been changed and would never be the same again. Peter arrived over the Earth and shut down the Merlin stones as he flew towards Avengers Tower. He saw that the battling had stopped. It only took the Earth one day to stop the Skrull invasion. I guess humans can be pretty powerful when we're all united. Peter then landed on the top of the building and walked inside to see everyone gathered around the television. Tony was at the White House, standing in front of a podium on live television, the cameras all focusing in on him and Captain America, who was standing beside him. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming on such short notice. I'm sure you're aware of the current situation. Our world was moments away from being controlled by a shape-shifting species of aliens called the Skrull. Thanks to the Avengers' efforts and our advanced scans, we managed to root out every last one of them before they managed to do too much harm to our society. However, the reason I called you all here is to announce that there has been a major development in the conflict over the Superhuman Registration Act. It is over. We have reached an agreement. The act will be administered by the Avengers, under the one man we can all trust to do their duties with honor and sound judgment. Tony raised his hand to reveal. Captain America, ladies and gentlemen. The president watching this blew up as he called Director of SHIELD Agent Hill. Stark didn't clear any of this with us. What the hell are you guys trying to pull? Well, Mr. President, like it or not, they just took their idea for ending this thing directly to the American people and the world. Agent Hill responded with a smile on her face. Tony and Steve were led into the Oval Office and stood next to the president, who was staring them down. What the hell did you do? No disrespect, sir. You would have never signed off on this if we took this plan to you, Tony said as he crossed his arms. You're damn right I wouldn't. The Attorney General and I have serious concerns about your plans. The president snapped back. Steve stepped forward and said, Frankly, sir, and I am including Tony and myself in this, not one of you bureaucratic assholes is completely happy with it, which is probably the best indication that what we have is good. There are also the latest poll numbers. An overwhelming majority of Americans support this arrangement. With all due respect, sir, what matters isn't whether you like it, but whether you can live with it, Tony spoke out. The president looked at the SHIELD agent beside him and said then back to Tony before sighing and saying, At times like this, I can see what Churchill meant by saying, democracy is the worst form of government except when compared to every other form of government. The president then turned to Steve and held out his hand. Don't mess this up, gentlemen. When they came back out and announced that the government had agreed, the crowd in the Avengers Tower started cheering. They still hadn't noticed Peter's arrival until Jarvis said, I believe a party is in order, correct? Sounds fun, Peter said, smiling. Everyone turned to see him and freaked out. He's back, Luke shouted as everyone crowded around. 616 Peter's family walked up to make sure he was all right. So what happened? Peter was suddenly bombarded by everyone's question when he jumped onto the roof and said, So you guys want to know what happened on the Skrull planet? Okay, sit back and prepare to be amazed. Peter then began explaining everything from start to finish, making them gasp with surprise. And then I took the Super Skrull by his head, and was seconds away from ending this whole ordeal by ending his life. 616 Peter looked down in disappointment, but then he heard his counterpart say, I didn't though. Instead I passed my trial and became the master of the Time Opal and the Space Amethyst. Peter showed the gems on his suit and then said, Using their power, I reverted the Super Skrull into an infant and transported him to a world that would shape him into a true hero. Everyone's jaws dropped as Spiderman landed on the ground. 616 Peter smiled, happy that his other could find a better way. Now when's the party? I'm going home after it, Peter shouted as threw his hands into the air. Chapter 50, Issue 50, Trials of Merlin End. Tony and Steve came back to see a party in full swing. Peter was eating a piece of pizza while explaining the importance of space-time and how it operated. Thanks to gaining the Merlin stones, Peter's knowledge of the two seemed to be improving by the second. Millions of equations that baffled scientists before on these matters were slowly becoming more simplified for him to understand. So traveling manually through space at light speed is way too slow, in order to achieve faster than light travel. 616 Peter Parker nodded his head, fascinated by the findings his counterpart, when Tony said, "Well, look who made it back in one piece." Peter smiled and said, "Hey, Tony, just in time, I was just conversing with them about the possibility of faster than light travel to journey to other galaxies." "Now this is my kind of party," Tony smiled as he joined in on the conversation. They partied well into the night with geek talk and good booze. By the time things had calmed down, most people had fallen asleep or passed out from overdrinking. Peter was getting ready to leave. He just had one more thing to take care of. He made sure to bring his counterpart before he called up Strange and had him find Professor X. They had to prepare the spell in order to hide Spider-Man's identity once more. As they were standing inside Strange's sanctum, Charles, Strange, and Peter stood in a circle with 616 Peter standing in the center. Aunt May and MJ had come along as well. The two of them were standing beside them, watching with a bit of worry. Before Strange began, he gave 616 Peter a stern glance. "Peter, what we're about to do is a major invasion of privacy. Your counterpart will supply the energy for the spell. This will erase any known documentation and footage of you revealing your identity, while Professor Xavier creates a fake non-existent hero and identity to take your place, in their memories. Everyone other than those that knew before will remember," Professor X added. 616 Peter thought back to his Aunt May getting shot and said, "Do it." Peter held out his hand and placed it on the magic circle, and with a burst of energy from the power ruby, he activated the spell. A glow spread across the world as all the physical proof that Spider-Man was Peter Parker was erased and swapped with a fake called Mosquito Man, a joking reference to what Spider-Man could have been. Xavier felt the energy of the power ruby flowing through him as he used his psychic power to swap out their memories. And for a second, he felt omnipotent and like he could accomplish anything if he chose to do so. When he saw this, Peter snapped his finger and said, "Focus, Charles, finish what you have to do, and nothing else." Professor X shook his head and felt ashamed for falling prey to temptation. He quickly recovered from his desires and focused in on his job, completing the action in a matter of seconds. Peter removed his hand and retracted the power ruby's energy as he stared at the 616 Peter and said, "It's done. Other than your closest relatives, now everyone thinks that the person that unmasked is Mosquito Man, and since James Lincoln doesn't exist, they'll never be able to confirm his identity." 616 Peter sighed and said, "This isn't a mistake I'll be making in the future." Peter laughed and said, "I said the same thing. Funny how it never works out." Spider-Man then stretched his arms and said, "Well, if you ever get the chance, you can drop by my universe. The UID is 891211. Something tells me we'll be meeting again." The Parkers looked to him and said, "You're leaving already?" Peter smiled and replied, "I have my own Aunt May and MJ to take care of back home. It's been fun, but I accomplished what I came here to do. Besides, it's not like we'll never see each other again. Universal travel isn't exactly impossible, and I know Reed Richards can definitely pull it off, so if you ever feel like taking a vacation or something, feel free to drop on by." Aunt May hugged him and said, "When you can tell me and your uncle about yourself, can you give Ben my regards?" Peter gave her a hug and said, "For you, Aunt May, anything." MJ walked up to him and gave him a kiss on the cheek. "Thanks for the present, Tiger. Take care of yourself over there." Peter grinned and replied, "Just so know, you can shrink down the suit into a bracelet and wear it all the time. That way you don't lose your spider powers, and suiting up is just a simple thought away." MJ smiled and said, "Thanks, I think I'm going to have a lot of fun with this." 616 Peter came up and held out his hand, and the two shook as he said, "Thank you for all the help, and don't be a stranger. That dimension hopping thing works both ways. Next time you should bring some friends. Maybe you should take a vacation here." "See, now you're just copying me." The two shared a laugh as Peter turned around and opened up a portal. He turned around one last time to see his heroes that he grew up with and waved goodbye as he jumped into the portal. As he traveled through the colorful warping of space, he focused on his destination. However, he ended up somewhere completely different. He appeared inside a vast forest lake. The large circular pond had a single person sitting at the edge of it. He was wearing a long gray robe and had a short-cut beard. From what Peter could tell, he looked middle-aged with eyes that showed experience far beyond his years. Peter was about to say something when the man spoke. "Welcome, Peter. I've been waiting for you for a long time." He was stunned because he had figured out who this man was, or rather what he was. "Merlin? No, you're an echo made by the reality topaz, the soul emerald, and the mind sapphire." Merlin smiled. "Intuitive one, aren't you? Well, take a seat, let's talk." Peter sat down and looked over the lake. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Peter nodded his head. "Yeah, it's nice here. Though it could use a theme park, like with a big old sign that says Merlin's Hideaway." "I started my journey here. My mother, the Lady of the Lake, gave birth to me and set me on my path of magic. During my lifetime, I lost many loved ones because of the choices I made. Allies abandoned me, my closest friends and family betrayed me and attempted to steal from me. Merlin waved his hand as a series of stones appeared in the sky. In a fit of rage from the sting of Morgan's betrayal, I left this place and began journeying through the cosmos. Along my travels I discovered the Infinity Stones, but instead of using them, I tried to understand them in order to advance my own magic. Merlin waved his hand, showing battles that could shake entire cosmos. During my time in possession of the stones wasn't what you would call pleasant. Countless beings came to try and take them from me, and it came down to a major conflict between me and a mad titan. He came to kill me with the one being in the universe that was capable of such a thing. However, at this point, I had learned enough to do without them, so right in front of them, I cast the Infinity Stones out into the universe, and for a while, I was at peace. Merlin sighed before he continued. After some time I managed to crystallize my own understanding of the Infinity Stones and crafted my gems, empowering them with a fraction of the universes and my power. He looked over to Peter and said, "Do you know the major difference between my Infinity Gems and the Infinity Stones?" Peter mulled over the question and suddenly thought of something that should have been impossible. Your gems work in other universes. Merlin smiled. Correct. The Infinity Stones are a manifestation of that particular universe's laws, so it would make sense that by taking them outside their reality they would lose the source of power that fuels them. However, each of my Infinity Gems contains universes inside them, so when you travel to other realities it acts as a conduit to connect to that reality's laws. So that's the reason the Merlin Gems worked in the 616 universe. Peter said, slapping his fist into his palm. Yeah, so I wouldn't call that universe the 616 anymore, as it has already broken away from the original timeline. Now it's more like a 616-2. Peter nodded his head. Makes sense. I guess that means somewhere out there is the actual 616 universe where they never met me. Merlin then responded, lifting a brow. Disappointed? I can understand. It makes you think, why bother interfering if it isn't going to have any real effect? Peter laughed and said, Are you kidding me? I made a whole new universe. Any world where Spidey gets a happy ending makes me happy enough. Merlin smiled as he said, You are an interesting one. My stones wouldn't choose just anybody. I guess that gives me some peace of mind. Merlin stood up. But you know it isn't this simple. Taking possession of these gems are a big responsibility. I created them to maintain order in my world from beings that could alter it as they see fit. Certain gods that can destroy entire galaxies, beings that can control the fabric of reality, they all make mistakes and abuse their powers, or think they know better and end up causing havoc without realizing it. How many rewrites do you think a universe can take? Every time someone breaks the universe's laws, repercussions are always present. If you accept the responsibility now, then I will pass over the remaining Merlin gems and you will have successfully passed the trials. After becoming the master of the stones, we'll have to use that power to and act as judge, jury, and executioner towards these beings. You'll have abandoned being human and become something greater. But it is for the better. After all, think of all the lives you could save. Peter froze. He couldn't lie to himself. He wanted these stones, but when he heard of the responsibilities that came with it, he paused. He was still human, and still wanted to live a human life. If he chose to accept this power, he might change into something he wouldn't recognize anymore. If I refuse, then does that mean I have to give up the remaining stones? Merlin nodded his head and said, Yes, you will forfeit the right to wield the stones and all their power. I refuse, Peter said bluntly. Why? Merlin asked. Because as much as I am about being power and responsibility, there is such a thing as too much. If a giant monster comes to Earth, believe me, I'll be the first one to help out, but I owe nothing to the rest of the universe. I want a family, and a life outside my superhero antics. I can't have one if I'm of battling extra-dimensional threats every day. If I was given the choice to live like a god or a man, then I chose to live as a man. Merlin smiled and said, You pass. Peter cocked his head sideways and said, Say what now? I said you pass. I would never hand the power of my stones over to someone who thinks themselves a god. I made the stones to protect the universe's law, this is true, but I also only made it for humans to wield. Whereas if a person that sees himself a god would act on their selfish desires, seeing themselves above all others, it truly is never a good thing. People like that often would use the power to satisfy their greed and ego. However, as kind-hearted humans, all we can do, just try to move forward making the best decisions we're capable of. Sure, they may not always be the right ones, but at least they're being led by good intentions. Peter then looked up and said, So are the trials over? Merlin smiled and said, On the contrary, they have only just begun. Stay sharp, Peter, and never let power change who and what you are. If you do, you might just lose everything. With a snap of his finger, Peter felt the entire world shift. "I look forward to meeting you in real life, my successor." Were the last words he heard Merlin speak as he reappeared beside MJ holding her hand as if he had never left. "Peter, what happened?" "The stones, they're gone," MJ shouted out. Chapter 51, Issue 51. Secret Wars Part 1. Peter grabbed MJ and hugged her. Before she could ask what was going on, he gave her a deep kiss, and as he parted lips, he smiled and said, "I missed you." MJ blushed and smiled. "You were never gone, Tiger. As soon as you reached out and touched the stones, they all just up and disappeared." Peter smiled and began explaining what happened. "I was gone for 3 whole days," Peter said, finishing his story. "I'm telling you, Tiger, you never moved from that spot," MJ said, smiling in a teasing manner. Peter then said with an exaggerated tone, "I can't believe it, don't you believe me? I guess you have to show me how much you missed me." MJ replied, placing her arms around his neck. "Ahem." Dr. Strange coughed, making his presence known. "I am still here, you know?" Feeling a bit irritated because he was disrupting their good mood, Peter spoke in a smart-ass tone. "Why are you here?" "This is my vault," Strange replied, starting to grow a little frustrated. The two laughed as they teased Strange together. MJ placed her arm around Peter's elbow and said, "I guess we should leave then." Peter paused for a second, then asked, "What about MJ's magic item?" Strange pointed to the mirror MJ webbed up during Morgan's infiltration. That mirror was a gift for Merlin's wife, Igraine. It would reflect any magic cast at it, and its secondary function is to create a mirror world that will give control over the spells your opponents cast. Though there is a limit, a powerful enough physical attacks can shatter the mirror. MJ held the mirror in her hands and said, "Cool." She then placed it into her bag of holding before the two walked out of Strange Sanctum. They walked home and they almost couldn't believe that their parents and guardians believed that they were at a science meet for the last 3.5 months and thought nothing of it. Peter sighed as he didn't like having their memories manipulated like this, but he still wasn't ready to tell them he was Spider-Man. He went to bed that night. The next morning he decided that he would spend some time with his family and friends for the next few days. As he headed downstairs to eat with his family, he noticed that Ben was in a chipper mood. "You look happy," Peter said, sitting down, and started to chow down on Aunt May's famous wheat cakes. Ben smiled and said, "Yep, I got a job as foreman of a new company called Damage Control." Peter almost choked on his food. The company specializes in repairing the property damage caused by conflicts between superheroes and supervillains. "That's the one, pays good, and I get to help people," Ben replied in a happy tone. May sat down and joined them. Peter then asked, "You know you don't have to work anymore? I have enough money to take care of us all." Ben laughed. "I like working, Peter, keeps me young." May shook her head. "That's your money, Peter, besides, we like where we are." Peter laughed and said, "Fine, but at least let me pay for the bills." May shook her head and said, "We'll have no such thing. Parkers can take care of themselves, and your money would better off be spent towards your future plans." Peter smiled as he said, "You just not going to let me help out on this, are you?" Ben laughed and said, "Nope, you'd have better luck taking on a supervillain than changing our minds on this one." Peter snickered as he thought, "If that's all it takes, then I think my chances would be pretty good." After breakfast, he gave Aunt May a hug and said, "Thanks for the meal, I'm heading over to MJ's for a bit." As he walked over there, he and MJ received a call from two different at the same time. Mary Jane got a call from Angel asking if they wanted to hang out and go on a double date, while Johnny, on the other hand, called Peter just to do the same but also bragged that he and Angel were an item now. "Fine, sounds fun. I needed a break. Been too busy lately. Why don't we invite Liz and Harry and make it a triple date?" Peter replied. "Cool, I got an expensive place set up for us. I text you the address," Johnny answered and hung up as Peter knocked on MJ's door. Her mother answered and smiled while saying, "Good to see you again, Peter. MJ's upstairs in her room." "Thank you, Mrs. Watson, and it's good to see you too," Peter said as he ran up the stairs. After knocking on her door, he opened it up and saw her trying on new outfits for the date. Peter almost drooled as he saw her in a sexy red dress that looked perfect on her body. He couldn't stop himself as he walked up to her and placed his arms around her hips and he said, "You look beautiful, babe." MJ smiled as she gave him a kiss. "I just want to look nice for our date tonight." Peter smiled and replied, "You know anything you wear looks good on you?" MJ then turned around and embraced him. Burying her head into his chest, she said, "Smooth talker. So until the date you want to come to Stark's with me, I have a new toy I want to show off," Peter said, grinning. "Oh, something from your little adventure?" MJ asked in return. Peter nodded his head as he asked, "So, you coming?" MJ used her symbiote to put on her street clothes and said, "Of course, I'm curious as to what you got." MJ told her mom they were going out on a date as they dashed off out of the house. They ran until they were far enough away and suited up to webbed over towards Avengers Tower. As they landed on the building, they saw that it was almost completely constructed. All that was missing were a few floors and the logo. Eager to check out the place, the two smiled in approval as they walked inside. Peter saw a prototype Jarvis that consisted as an Iron Man suit with a holographic display of the butler he was all too familiar with. "Good evening, Spider Duo. Tony is working in the B4 lab right now. Would you like me to notify him?" "Yes, please," MJ said, looking at Jarvis in wonder. "Every time I come here, it's like I get a treat just from looking at Tony's tech." Peter shook his head. "Grease monkey. Bio nerd." MJ shot back as they laughed. "Mr. Stark, Ms. Watson, and Mr. Parker have arrived," Jarvis messaged to Tony. "Really? Great timing, send them down," Tony replied with a bit of excitement in his voice. Peter and MJ were led into one of Tony's lab rooms, where the ships they confiscated from the Chitauri were pulled into thousands of parts. Tony was standing over a large table covered in technical equipment, and he seemed to be focusing on an almost human-looking brain made from a similar material as the Chitauri organic crystals. "Hey Peter, MJ, good you see you," Tony said, looking down a microscope. Peter and MJ walked up next to him and saw the advanced technological wonder he had built. Peter looked over it and said, "Tony, this is Jarvis's new brain. I managed to recreate the material and its functions using Earth technology and materials. And this isn't all, the brain is actually capable of simulating emotions. A robot that can feel. Isn't that amazing?" Peter smiled and said, "I imagine its computation functions will shoot through the roof as well. Also this design." Peter looked over the blueprints that were strewn all over the place. "That's my new suit model," Tony said as he stood up. "When I was using your webbing to coat the plates, it suddenly hit me. Endosim armor, psionic, biological armor, partially modeled on your symbiote's biology. I based its structure on the scans I took on your suit back then. Next, I'll be programming it into the psionic metal you showed me how to create, allowing me directly to integrate a synthetic structure into the suit building blocks. Mixing it with your webbing fluid as the base, the suit is pretty powerful, so don't think I'll be needing a new one anytime soon. Mark 37 is going to be my masterpiece." Impressive, Tony, but it still doesn't let you do anything on the biological level. It just acts like a symbiote in the most obvious ways, but still pretty good imitation. Peter's eyes drifted to the storage device of the armor when MJ said, "Using nanobots to store the armor in your marrow, bleeding edge prototype. I guess this is the next step for the armor." Peter nodded his head and started offering advice, when Tony was surprised by his help and said, "Wow, I didn't even think of that. Peter, where did you learn this?" Peter smiled as he said, "Actually, that's what I came here to talk about. Can we go to a place with a larger lab?" Tony nodded his head as he took him to the B7 lab. It was around the size of 3 football stadiums, and there was just enough room on the lab platform for Peter to use a certain new spell he'd been working on. He turned the biggest basement Tony had into an expansive space like the bags that were given to them by Dr. Strange. Once the area space multiplied multiple times over, Spider-Man proceeded to pull out the giant Skrull ship he modified. Tony was shocked, as was MJ. Her eyes shined brightly as she began inspecting the ship. "Where did you get this? How did you make my hangar so huge?" Tony asked. "Firstly, I just expanded the space. Think of it like I made everything in the room really, really big by expanding the distance between spatial coordinates, the opposite of Hank Pym's methods. Check it out, there shouldn't be any reported changes of the room size. It's contained to just this floor. Check your tablet. I'll wait." Son of a... Tony quickly read the scans. As for the ship, it was confiscated from an alien species called the Skrulls that just so happened to exist in another reality. The technology they adapted is from very powerful and ancient beings called the Celestials, and they were believed to be gods. Peter began to explain his journey and what he went through. They listened with apt attention as he explained how big the Avengers were, what kind of threat the Skrulls were, and what he did to help out. "There's no way that happened," Pepper mumbled. "Honest to God, I swear every word is true," Peter crossed his heart. "A civil war, huh? Hopefully, this world will never have to experience such a thing." Tony shook his head, unsure of what to make of his counterpart's actions. But at least there was an answer to the problem, so if such a thing does occur, we'll have a solution ready. Peter smiled. He was also hoping it wouldn't come to that, and with him helping, maybe they could avoid splitting up altogether. They needed to face Thanos as a full team of Avengers. "All right, now I give you a tour around my ship." Peter led them in and showed them the many changes to it. "There will be no weapons on board this ship. I'm redesigning it to be a purely explorational vessel fit for scientific discovery and advancement. Peter then showed them to the civilians' quarters. In here I want to create a biodome that has a self-sustaining habitat for the people that will inhabit this someday. Tony looked around fascinated by the technology, MJ as well. Peter, this will take us years to uncover how the technology will operate. Peter then pulled up a hologram showing everything he had learned thus far and said, "Tell me, Tony, with a good head start, do you think we can make something to help turn the Earth into a utopia?" Tony cocked a brow and said, "What do you have in mind?" Peter scratched his head in a bit of embarrassment when he said, "I was thinking of building a school for people that want to work on projects only focusing on creating things that are beneficial for all of mankind. Things such as improving medical technology, comfort, entertainment, agriculture production, and anything that includes helping to create more resources for mankind to gain more freedom and wealth." "A school? No. This is an entire city," Tony said with a look of awe. "Well, the ship looks to be about the size of a small island. How many people want to do some good for this world but get slammed in the face by investors that don't see any profit in their creations or ideas? I want to make a place where these kinds of minds gather and work for the betterment of Earth and mankind." Tony nodded his head as Peter continued, "A company is a great idea, but I'm still too young for people to take me serious as a company owner, plus I still need to get my bachelor's degree, or else no one in the science community will take Peter Parker seriously." Peter, MJ, and Tony then began working on learning everything they could on the Skrull ship. They had completely lost track of time until an alarm for their scheduled event. "Time to go, MJ," Peter said as she climbed out of the engine room covered in grease. "Okay, just need to clean up real quick," Mary Jane said as she started walking away. Peter saw his own appearance and said, "I think I could use one myself." "You guys going somewhere?" Tony asked. "It's a date night," MJ said as she entered the elevator with Peter. "Have fun, you two. I'll take good care of your ship while you're gone," Tony said with an almost evil grin. "Tony, no joy rides," Peter said as the door closed. Yeah. I hear ya, Dad," Tony responded. As they rode the elevator up, MJ grabbed Peter's hand and said, "You know we can always share a shower." Peter felt a shock travel up his spine as he saw the seductive look on her face. Chapter 52, Issue 52, Secret Wars Part 2. MJ and Peter ran into the room that they were assigned to as card-carrying Avengers. They ran to the bathroom, dropping their clothes on the floor, with flirtatious giggling the whole way. As they got inside, MJ pulled him over to the bath and turned on the hot water. Peter pulled over the shower head and started washing himself and MJ down real quick. "Take a seat, Tiger," MJ said as she grabbed the soap. Peter smiled as he sat down at the edge of the marble step and let MJ wash his back. She placed her breast along his shoulders as she worked the soap into his skin, massaging his muscles as way around to his front. Peter grinned, grabbing her and switching places with her. "Eep," MJ giggled out, as he started washing her down and applying the soap. While the suds covered up her body, he started to grope her large breasts as his hand made its way down and started pleasuring her. MJ leaned her head back and moaned in pleasure as Peter started to kiss her. Their tongues twirled around one another in a passionate kiss while MJ grabbed the shower head and cleaned the soap off of their bodies. She bit her lip as she stared at his fully erect member. "I can't wait anymore, Tiger." MJ let out a purr as she felt his prick pushing against her stomach. Peter lifted her leg and placed his lips near her ear as he whispered, "I love you, MJ," and pushed himself inside with a single thrust. MJ moaned out in pleasure as she came. "A little warning next time, and Tiger, I love you too." Peter growled as he imitated a tiger, making MJ laugh. He kissed her deeply while he started to push and pull his hips. She placed her arm around his neck and moved with him, making Peter feel waves of euphoria while her passageway tightened. Peter sat down with her still on top of him and started to massage her breast, sucking on them, making her cry out in joy as he pushed in as far as he could reach. MJ stared into his eyes as they started to glisten over with a blissful expression. Peter started to speed up, not holding back his strength at all. MJ started to feel her body growing lighter as she said, "I love you, Peter. I love you, I love you, I love you." Peter smiled and said, "I love you too," as they both came together. MJ's legs quivered as she felt her abdomen grow warm. Peter smiled, still ready to go, when MJ gave him a deep kiss and said, "Save some for after the date. We'll be late if we don't hurry. After all, we just blew 50 or so minutes." Peter sighed as he held MJ close to his body. Giving her a kiss back, he stood up with her legs still wrapped around his waist and carried her into the shower. The two washed each other down and got ready for their date night. Peter was dressed up in a nice black suit with a black striped bow tie, and MJ was in the red single-piece suit that had an opening on her back that ran all the way up to her shoulders. Peter saw that she was wearing his birthday gift around her neck. Smiling, he walked up to her neck and gave her a few soft kisses. She placed her hand on his face and leaned her head to the side and kissed him on the lips. "Looking good, Tiger," MJ said as she turned around. "What can I say? I clean up nice," Peter said, tightening his tie. They headed downstairs, and Jarvis had pulled a car out for them. "Thank you, Jarvis," MJ said as she took a seat in the back of the Mercedes-Benz AMG Quartet 2. As Peter took his seat, Jarvis replied, "Not a problem, Ms. Watson. Tony has ordered me to serve anyone accepted as an Avenger." Peter shook his head and said, "I have to talk to Tony about that protocol. Too many holes in security. I mean, what if an Avenger betrayed our cause? Wouldn't Jarvis still help?" MJ laughed. "I'm sure he isn't worried about it since the Avengers are just starting to get on their feet. He'll probably start making additional failsafes to protect against such things." Peter sighed as he thought, different universe, same Tony. We seriously have to have a chat about his habit of leaping before learning to crawl. MJ laughed as the car started moving. The car was completely automated, so they didn't have to worry about returning it in case they needed to suit up. He looked at the address Johnny sent him and saw that it was the famous revolving restaurant known as The View. Peter smiled as he said, Johnny wasn't joking when he said expensive. MJ peeked at the address and said, "Wow! I've always wanted to try eating there once." Peter laughed and placed his arm around MJ's shoulder. "Well, I guess we'll get that chance." MJ leaned her head into his shoulder and Peter leaned his head against hers. As they drove towards Broadway, MJ and Peter spoke about their hobbies and about their plans for the future. After arriving at the large high-rise restaurant, Peter helped MJ get out of the car and watched as their ride drove off and parked itself. MJ placed her arm around Peter's and walked alongside him until they reached the host's podium. "Reservation for Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson," Peter said with a satisfied smile on his face. The host read through his list and said, "Ah, yes. Good evening, Mr. Parker, Ms. Watson. Please head to the 48th floor. Your fellow guests have already arrived." Peter walked MJ to the elevator and rode up, watching the view of New York City grow smaller in the distance and more radiant to the eyes. As the two reached their destination, they came out into a room that was slowly rotating around in a circle. The city looked like gleaming jewels that shined just as brightly as the ones in the night sky. "Over here!" Peter heard Johnny shout. He turned to see him in a slick black and blue suit, and Angel was sitting next to him wearing an expensive-looking white two-part dress that showed off her belly button. Harry was wearing a light brown and green suit, and Liz was wearing a yellow single-piece dress that matched her hair color. Peter and MJ walked up to their table. Being the gentleman he was, he pulled out the chair for MJ to sit down beside them. "It's good to see you guys," Mary Jane said with a smile. Peter sat down next to her and said, "I know it's been a while, but we've been kind of busy this past couple of months. Aunt May did say you guys went to a science meet or something along those lines. Was it any fun?" Harry asked, smiling, making Johnny and Angel look at him with a funny expression. Peter smiled as replied, "Yeah, it was fun, all right. We learned a lot." MJ then started to talk with Liz. "How's school?" "A lot less fun without you there, MJ," Liz answered. "How about you, Angel?" MJ asked. "Well, actually, next year I'll be transferring out to a different school," Angel replied. Of course, Peter realized that she was talking about Avengers Academy. After all, he may end up going there as well. It's not every day one can ask for super geniuses like Reed Richards and Hank Pym to teach at their school. Liz looked a bit down when Angel said, "I'll still be living in the same place, so it's not like we can't see each other often." Liz smiled and said, "Congratulations, it's a fancy school, isn't it?" Angel smiled back before saying, "Well, the teachers they have lined up are certainly impressive, to say the least." Peter then spoke up. "So Johnny, how has everything been going?" Johnny placed his arm around Angel's shoulder and said, "Really good. I feel like I'm on cloud 9, if you know what I'm saying." Angel blushed as she gave Johnny a quick kiss on the cheek. "We started dating last week. Johnny's been really good to me." Everyone else cheered a bit and congratulated them when MJ and Liz nodded their heads together before saying, "Congratulations. Hurt our girl Johnny, and the only place anyone will find your face is on a milk carton." MJ smiled with a look of pure innocence. "They'll never find the body," Liz followed up. Johnny gulped and laughed as he said, "I wouldn't dream of it. I really like Angel and I think we got something special." Angel blushed and placed her hands in front of her face. "Enough, please. I can't take any more. Can we just order our meals now?" Everyone laughed before they settled down to read the menu. Once they picked out what they wanted, everyone ordered their very expensive meals. After giving the confused glance at the prices a couple of times, Peter looked to Harry and asked, "So Harry, how have things been with the family?" Harry sighed and looked a little down as he said, "Let's not talk about my situation right now. I came out tonight to help me blow off some steam with my friends, so no more family drama, please." Peter lifted a brow and said, "Nah, Friends help each other through the good and the bad. What's up, Harry? Harry sighed. It's Ma, she's sick again, and Dad is completely losing his shit. He isn't eating, he hardly comes home to see her, and he takes out his frustrations on me every chance he gets. I know he's only lashing out because he's worried about her condition worsening, but it's just getting a little harsh at home right now. Everyone looked a little bummed out when Harry said, "See, this is why I didn't want to bring it up." Liz grabbed his hand and squeezed it. Peter and everyone got up and gave him a hug. Harry sighed and said, "Thank you." Peter knew what he was going to do later tonight, going to cure his mother, and just in case Harry as well. Everyone sat back down and Peter said, "Don't worry, man, I'm sure she'll pull through." Harry smiled and said, "Thanks, Peter, I don't know about it this time, I've never seen Ma look so weak." Seeing the mood was getting a little heavy, Harry sighed and said, "Thanks guys, but I came out to have some fun tonight, so let's keep off this topic for a while." Everyone agreed and did their best to talk about anything else concerning the Osborns' issues. "So yeah, after taking the rest of this year off, I plan to go to a university and get my master's degree and graduate with honors. I plan on opening up a school for people that want to use their gifts and knowledge to help mankind as a whole," Peter said, changing the subject to help his buddy out. Harry smiled and said, "I can see you doing something like that, plus it would be great publicity for the company we talked about building." "Oh yeah, I almost forgot about that. Do you still have all those environmental improvement projects your mom started? I would love to fund them," Peter said with an excited tone, as they would be great projects to focus on for the school. "Yeah, actually we've been talking about them a lot these past few days. Dad was considering dumping the projects because they haven't gotten anywhere yet, but Mom tore him a new one," Harry replied. "That's what he gets for marrying an environmental lawyer and researcher," MJ said, laughing a bit. Their food had finally arrived and they continued to talk about simple, normal, everyday matters throughout their meal. After eating, they split the bill and started heading home. "It was good to see you guys. Let's do this again sometime," Harry said as he got into the car with Liz. Peter and MJ smiled as they waved goodbye and went their separate ways. Once they were out of view, the two suited up and started webbing off towards Harry's place. "Where are you going?" MJ asked, already knowing the answer. "To save one of my best friend's mother," Peter said as they drew closer to their destination. They landed on the roof when Peter said, "So do you want to heal her or should I?" MJ smiled and held her hand out before saying, "You go ahead, after all, you're the bio nerd." Chapter 53. Issue 53. Secret Wars Part 3. "Keep a lookout for me, would ya, Grease Monkey?" Peter asked. MJ gave him a kiss on the cheek and said, "Of course." While the spider couple sat outside and waited for it to get late, Harry had already returned home and went to sleep shortly thereafter. Sneaking inside, Spider-Man knew he had to be careful because Osborn had plenty of security. Thankfully, Peter's spidey sense could allow him to avoid them perfectly. He quickly made his way into Harry's room first and used the symbiote to check his body for the disease his mother was suffering through, and as he suspected, he indeed found the genetic damage responsible for it. Using Webster, he quickly cured his friend before moving on to his mother. It didn't take Peter long to find a room with hospital equipment lined up around Harry's mom. He stayed on the ceiling as he lowered his symbiote to start working its magic. After a few minutes of correcting the damaged genes, he quickly made his way outside. MJ looked at him and said, "Is it done?" Peter nodded his head and replied, "I think they're going to wake up feeling better than ever tomorrow." "They?" MJ asked. "Yeah, it was a hereditary disease. Harry had it too, and the disease was even more active with him. In just a couple years, the symptoms would start showing with early onset muscle degeneration, and then eventually, total paralysis." MJ hugged Peter. "Thank God for these symbiotes. I still can't believe your parents managed to make these things." Peter then said, "I know. MJ, I've been thinking." He then webbed over to the nearest building and started swinging away. "I think I want to finish my parents' work. If I could create a med bed as they had originally designed, then could you imagine what that would do for medicine? Go into a hospital with a terminal disease, spend $5 to cure it." MJ laughed. "Now that's affordable healthcare, of course. You might just end up putting a bunch of doctors out of a job." Peter shook his head. "Not all of them. There's no need for them to lose their jobs either, but they'll have to shift it to becoming researchers. After all, there is still a lot to learn about our bodies, and there are other things the suit can't help with, like childbirth, vaccinations, and improvement immunities." MJ nodded her head. "Still, some people are going to lose their jobs." "That they are," Peter said in response. "But hopefully, people smart enough to become doctors can find another place to work. I'm sure there are plenty of places that won't have our tech for some time. Not to mention, you can't lug around a med bed around everywhere. First responders will still need extensive training." Peter then jumped over a large building as his spider senses went off. A bullet had come inches away from hitting his eyepiece when he used his power to stop the bullet. Okay, now who's dumb enough to shoot at me? I have spider senses, you know? Peter and MJ dropped down as Webster located the place the bullet came from by tracing its trajectory. Peter and MJ jumped after the source when another bullet shot after MJ from a different direction. Two shooters? Are they trying to split us up? Peter said when MJ webbed off towards the other bullet's direction. I got this one, Spider-Man, you take care of the other. Peter wasn't worried about MJ, but he couldn't help but get the strangest feeling that something was wrong. He sped up and landed inside a building that was under construction. He found a sniper rifle yet no one else around. He focused his spidey sense and searched the room. He saw two silhouettes observing him from the distance, and before they could do anything else, he webbed them over quicker than their eyes could follow. Peter placed his hands on the sides of their heads and crashed them together, knocking them out in an instant. Without waiting, he rummaged through their pockets, pulled out their wallets, and checked over their IDs. Running their history with Webster, he was surprised to discover that it was a couple of regular old citizens without any criminal records. In fact, they were regular people. One was a school teacher and the other a janitor. Peter didn't know what was going on, so he decided to contact MJ and tell her what happened on his part as he slapped them awake. MJ responded, I found the same, ugh. MJ cried out, making Peter panic. He webbed the guys up as he flew over to her destination at full speed. He reached a rooftop to see a woman in full-body stealth outfit. The scare of her eyes were pitch black and the only part of her face that was showing. The woman was attacking MJ in an attempt to capture her. However, MJ was too quick for her. Spider-Woman leaped off the side of the building and used her telekinesis to stop her attacker from moving seconds before she landed on the adjacent building and webbed her up. The assailant suddenly screamed, You think you can stop us? Hail Hydra! Peter dropped down beside her and chopped the back of her neck, knocking her out in a single blow. He then opened her mouth and pulled out a fake tooth that had poison in it. You okay? MJ shook her head. She was fast, and she could use some kind of stun blast that could affect Spiderling. MJ said, holding her side, as the suit healed over a small part of her waist. Oh, and she knew how to manipulate my spider sense. She timed a gunshot with her friend's attack. Spider-Woman pointed to the other unconscious man laying sprawled out on the roof. Peter frowned as he removed the mask to see a young Jessica Drew, aka Spider-Woman, except in this universe because MJ got the name first. Peter examined her and said, No freaking way. He quickly used Webster to pull a weakened version of symbiote out of her body. Peter then tried to extract the memories from the species when it suddenly self-destructed by some strange electrical discharge that also damaged the symbiote on his body. It wasn't enough to cause any real damage as the suit repaired itself. Clearly they had no idea how much more advanced their symbiotes were. However, had they not made upgrades to them, there was no doubt that discharge would have been lethal for their suits. Peter started to freak out when he grabbed Jessica and MJ and used his magic to open a portal back to his place. Peter checked over his house to discover it had been ransacked. Mr. and Mrs. Parker. Is anyone here? Peter called out several times. MJ was starting to freak out as well as she checked her house to discover that it was in a similar situation. She came back and said, They're gone, Peter. My parents are gone. Peter didn't know what to do when he suddenly heard the phone ring. He walked over and picked it up and put it on speaker as heard a voice with a German accent on the other side beginning to talk. Hello, Mr. Parker, or should I say Spider-Man? Peter gritted his teeth as he responded. I take it that I'm talking to a Hydra agent then? The voice sighed and continued, It was unfortunate that we failed to capture Ms. Watson, but I guess we'll just have to settle for her parents. Peter gripped his fist and said, If you so much as touch a hair on our family, I'll make sure you never live to see tomorrow. Do you hear me? One hair. Easy, Mr. Parker. We still have a use for you, after all. You wouldn't want to be responsible for the deaths of your girlfriend's parents, not to mention your own. Peter froze as the voice continued. I was surprised to find out that the blank gene we had been looking for had already been created. Your parents gave us the runaround for many years, even going as far as to give us an inferior product of the symbiote just to keep your precious aunt and uncle safe. How did you? Peter questioned. Find out all this. Well, that's my secret. I trust a smart boy like you already know what we're after? The voice said mockingly. An exchange right, me for our family. MJ frowned when Peter said this. Right. Duh. Very smart boy. Don't try any funny stuff or else the family gets it. Meet us at the Hudson Docks Pier 53 in 3 hours. Bring my useless protégés back to me as well. And do remember that contacting S.H.I.E.L.D. or any of your little friends Avenger friends, well, let's just say, you'll get your family back in pieces. Peter crushed the phone as he said, You have no freaking idea who you're messing with. He quickly spread his symbiote around the room to remove any surveillance cameras that it could find. After cleaning out his house, he went over MJ's and did the same thing. Seeing the worry on her face, Peter said, "It's okay, I'm going to take care of this." Peter walked outside when MJ ran beside him and said, "What are you going to do?" "Peter, your parents." Peter hugged his girlfriend and said, "It's okay, I promise that everything is going to be alright. I just have to go pick up a power I need to pull this off. Watch over our prisoner for a while for a bit, would you?" MJ looked to Jessica and said, "I'm coming with you." "They want me to come alone. I won't risk the lives of our families." MJ suddenly turned invisible. "There, now they can't see me coming. I told you we're in this together from beginning to end, right? MJ, we don't have time for this. This is Hydra we're talking about." Peter shot back. "I don't care. They're my parents and I'm responsible for their well-being. I going Parker, end of discussion. Did you forget we're partners, not just lovers?" Peter sighed as he teleported Jessica into a shield prison on the helicarrier. "Fine, but stay close." MJ walked up beside him and said, "So what's the plan?" Peter shook his head. "I'm going to go steal Professor X's ability, and then I'm going to wipe Hydra of the face of the earth." MJ head jerked back and said, "Why don't you just ask?" "I will, but something tells me he won't appreciate me for doing so." Peter then teleported over to Xavier's mansion and appeared inside his room. Charles, being the psychic he is since his arrival, he sat up out of bed and said, "Who's there?" "It's me, Professor. I've come to ask for a favor," Peter said, stepping out of the darkness and flipping on the bedroom light. "Peter, Mary, so good of you to drop by. Can I ask what you're doing here this late?" Charles asked as Peter removed his mask. "I need your power. A dangerous group known as Hydra has my family. I intend to use your power to save them and put an end to that neo-Nazi regime." Peter explained his situation. Xavier frowned. "I can help you, Peter, but what you're asking is very invasive. My power is not something I can just give away, especially to someone whose mind I can't read." Peter then said, "I'm sorry, I knew you'd say that, and I wasn't asking." He covered Xavier in his symbiote and began copying his X gene. After a few hours, Peter felt a wave of voices enter his head. He quickly used Webster to help him gain control over the power and placed limiters on himself so he wouldn't be forced to hear what people were thinking every second of every day. Peter pulled back Webster and saw the pissed of Charles as he stood up and shouted, "Peter, how could you?" Peter pointed to his legs and said, "You're welcome. I also cured you of any cancerous cells that were building up." Xavier was stunned as he just realized that he stood up. Peter shook his head. "I'm sorry, but I had no other choice. I'd love to sit down and explain what's happening, but I seriously just don't have the time." He activated his spell craft for a second again and ported them to the dock, where they were supposed to meet. "Keep your distance from me, but keep sight of me until it comes time for the exchange." MJ nodded her head and moved into the shadows. Peter walked over to the dock and stood underneath a lamp post for several minutes before anyone came close to him. A group of people could be seen walking over towards him. Each of them was wearing Hydra uniforms, and all of them had the same blackened whites of their eyes. Symbiote warriors. Peter thought as he saw a middle-aged looking man walk up alongside them. He had a strange, almost hypnotic spiral as irises and was wearing a lab coat. The man smiled as he looked over Spiderman and said, "Well, at least you came alone, a bit sooner than we agreed on, but oh well, now come along like a good boy." Chapter 54. Issue 54. Secret Wars Part 4. The middle-aged man looked around and said, "Odd, I could have sworn I told you to bring my test subject back with you." Peter looked at the man, finally recognizing who he was. Maynard Tybalt. Maynard Tybalt is the son of Fritz Tybalt, the former ringmaster of the Tybalt Circus during World War II. After his parents were executed for their failures in infiltrating the Judas, Maynard, who did not share his parents' sympathy for Nazism, became the leader of a circus and decided to move it to America, far from the scene of Hitler's rise to power and his parents' deaths. It appeared in this timeline he chose to follow in his parents' footsteps and joined Hydra. Peter knew his powers well, and of course it had to be mind control, one of his most hated powers. "Oh, you know my name?" Maynard smiled as he approached Peter. "Your protégé didn't make it. She died while I attempted to extract the symbiote." Maynard sighed. "Oh darn, what a waste. Oh well, she isn't my only superpowered experiment." Peter looked around and attempted to invade the mind of his foes, but the symbiotes managed to block his ability. Luckily, Maynard never would have guessed Peter gained a new power recently. He dove into his mind and saw everything that he needed to know. In less than a second, Peter felt sick as he shuffled through the Hydra scientist's head. He saw him performing countless experimentation on innocent people, dissecting them alive, and even creating a few supervillains. Peter wanted to throw up. He thought that it couldn't get any worse, but suddenly he saw his parents. They looked malnourished, tired, and beaten. Maynard was called in by a superior to force the answers out of his parents. However, as previous SHIELD agents, they knew of Maynard's abilities, and they actually gouged out their own eyes so he couldn't control them. Unable to pry the information from their heads, the villain kept them held up in a cell, waiting for the day that he could break their spirits. Maynard constantly used the threat of killing one of them to coerce information out of each other, but that would never work. His parents knew that if they spilled the information, they would be disposed of. Their refusal often resulted in him physically harming them or torturing them in various ways. Peter gritted his teeth. He saw the suffering he put them through and felt he had seen enough. Next, he scoured his brain, trying to locate where they were keeping the rest of his family. He finally felt a bit of relief when he saw that MJ's parents and his aunt and uncle were still safe. Lucky for him, the crazed Maynard had kept his word for the most part. However, he intended to use the symbiotes to control them in order to torture his parents. After reprogramming Maynard's mind for a preset of actions, Peter sent a message to MJ telepathically and she responded almost instantly. Okay, I'll go get them, what about you? I'm going to let him take me. Once he leads me to a base, I'll start ripping apart Hydra from the inside, Peter said as he walked over and held his hands up. Take me, just let my family go. Of course we will, Maynard replied. Peter obviously knew he was lying. The scheming rat that he is, would never hand over leverage that he could put to use. Peter had a pair of cuffs slapped on him, and he felt that all his powers sealed. It even forced his symbiote to retreat inside his body. These are specially made just for you. It took a while to make, but we managed to find someone to figure it out. Peter knew he was referring to the mutant known as Forge, one of his slaves. Only he could invent something of this level right now. After all, who else would be able to create equipment to deal with Spider-Man's powers without actually ever meeting or knowing of them? Peter still had his magic though, and that's all it would take to shatter these cuffs and wreak havoc. He was led into an invisible ship and began flying towards the ocean. MJ ran off towards downtown Manhattan. She had to hurry because once they had Peter, they were going to load up the prisoners and transport them to a holding facility along with Peter's parents. MJ arrived at a large high-rise with a helicopter pad on top of it. She then began looking through the building. Using her spider sense, she crawled through the air ducts and homed in on her family, and found a group of people who had black sacks covering up their heads. They were surrounded by armed guards that were each wearing Hydra-developed combat armor. MJ wanted nothing more than to bust out her family right now, but she knew what she had to do. She focused on her senses and heard them speaking on their radios. Target acquired. Move the packages to the black site. The Hydra agents started getting to work. They forced the hostages to start moving, and as they worked their way to the roof, the agents revealed a cloaked jet that could carry a small platoon. The hostages boarded it at gunpoint while MJ hid in plain sight, walking along beside them without making even the smallest of noises. Once she saw the pilot enter in his destination coordinates, she made her move. Spider-Woman webbed up every one of the Hydra agents before the jet could even leave the ground. She then hacked into the onboard computer using her symbiote. Once she shut down the jet and locked it out from being able to be remotely controlled, she transformed her image into an adult version of herself and walked back to the 13 people that had been brought here against their will and started removing the sacks over their heads. MJ found her family, and yet instead of relief, she felt her blood boiling. Aunt May had a bruise on her eye, and Ben and her father's faces and bodies were beaten black and blue. Her mother had a large bump on her head, a bit of dried blood running down her forehead. MJ felt like she was going to explode. She wanted to hurt someone, hurt them badly. She took a deep breath and reined in her emotions as she placed symbiote over them to cure their wounds. When the first person regained consciousness, they shouted, "Spider-Woman was saved." Another of the captives said as they noticed the situation around them. MJ raised her hand and said, "Keep quiet, it's not over yet. I still have to take care of the bad guys in the building." MJ couldn't stop seeing the damage the Hydra agents inflicted on them and gripped her fists so tightly that they cracked her knuckles. She then turned to her family and said, "Watsons, Parkers, I'm sorry we had to meet again like this." Her family members looked at her when they started shouting, "Peter, Mary." MJ smiled and felt a sense of warmth. She wanted to hug them and tell them she was right here. "Your kids are all right. They actually called us for help, so treat them to something good when you get back home." Hearing this, they began to calm down. MJ moved to the tail end of the jet, when MJ's mom said, "Excuse me, I know this is gonna sound strange, but do I know you?" MJ laughed and said, "Of course you do. I'm your friendly neighborhood Spider-Woman." As she opened the jet drop gate, she turned back to them and said, "I promise. This is almost over. Stay inside the jet, and I'll come back to let you know it's safe." MJ looked fondly at her family as she stepped outside and closed the jet. Calling up her favorite bald Cyclops, she took a deep breath and said, "Fury, got a squad of Hydra agents and kidnapping victims at the location I'm sending you. I need you to round them up when I'm done with them." "What?" Fury almost spit out the coffee he was drinking. MJ turned invisible and started walking towards the roof in trance. "Fury, they took our family. Hydra knows our identities. I'm sending over a cleanup crew. You alright, kid?" Fury said as he contacted Agent Hill and sent out his orders. "Yeah, oh, and Fury bring a few medics as well," MJ said as she started walking down the stairs, while Hydra members scrambled all throughout the building. "Are the hostages injured?" Fury asked. "No, but the Hydra agents are on the verge of death." MJ hung up as she opened up the door to the top floor and started moving towards the nearest Hydra operative. She rushed forward with her fist ready to do some damage and performed a running punch into the guard's chest, shattering the combat armor before sending him flying into the wall. She webbed him up seconds before the rest of the agents in the area were alerted to her actions. MJ dashed forward to a group of 3 and jumped on the neck of the guard in the center. She then her ability to stick to surfaces to flip him into the air, using only the soles of her feet while webbing up the remaining 2 soldiers' faces. Then as she spun mid-jump, she pulled the web lines, smacking them into each other seconds before the first guy's face slammed onto the ground. MJ webbed them onto the floor and continued on throughout the building, absolutely crushing every Hydra agent she came across. As she spotted a new group, she jumped over some railing and sent one guy flying into the ceiling with soaring uppercut and webbed him in place. One of the men tried to swipe at her with an electric rod, but MJ was too fast. Ducking down, she kicked out the back of guy's legs and webbed the top of his foot before throwing him onto a wall and punching him through it. A Hydra agent pointed his gun around, not knowing where to aim, when MJ placed her hand over the barrel at the same time he began pulling the trigger. Without a second's notice, MJ crushed the barrel and punched the Hydra agent straight in his jaw, knocking out his teeth. The rest of the villainous agents discovered someone had come as was picking off their operatives, and started opening fire, transforming the building into what can only be described as a scene of pure chaos. From outside of the building, the only thing one could see were flashes of light from the gunfire, accompanied by the screams of dozens Hydra agents crying out in pain. As she made her way down the high rise, she continued to destroy every last man and woman that dared to aim a gun at her. No one was getting off easy for what they did. This night, MJ wasn't fighting criminals. No, she was hunting animals and making sure those that hurt her family would pay. Some particular men were sitting inside the security room, watching this go on. One of the men was a large bald man standing around 6'4" and built like a tank. He held a thick metal link chain around his chest, wore no shirt, and had long blue jeans with steel-toed boots. He stared at MJ's current location on the monitors, but he couldn't see her image, just the blurs that preceded their beatdowns. However, that wasn't what interested him. What drew his interest wasn't the Hydra agents dropping left and right, but rather the organic webbing MJ used. "What an interesting material," he said as a tall, well-built, beautiful woman standing at 6'7" wrapped her arms around his chest and smiled. She had chestnut brown hair, and wore a revealing legless black and blue leotard that was covered in armored padding, and full-length arm gloves, and long black boots that also had armor plating on it. "You want that, baby?" the woman said when a large blonde-haired man walked up next to him. He was wearing a large tan trench coat, with a single striped shirt underneath it, blue jeans and leather boots. He was carrying a crowbar that he was slapping against his hand as he said, "We can go get it for you, boss. Just leave this intruder to us." A smaller person around 5'4" and built like a professional bodybuilder was wearing an outfit similar to the Juggernaut slapped his hands together before saying, "Yeah, let's crush M." Next to him was 6'4" man wearing a white tank top and a pair of combat pants and boots. He had spiky blonde hair and looked like a Spartan in his prime. "I don't know who's dumb enough to attack Hydra, but they just made a big mistake." Another bulky man around 6 feet tall and wearing a green and yellow tracksuit, pulled a link chain that was connected to a heavy metal ball the size of a wrecking ball, walked up next to their leader, and then laughed before saying, "We're going to wreck them." The man's ball and chain hit the ground, causing the ground beneath them to fracture. The shirtless man with the chain around his chest smiled and said, "Let's show this mere intruder what the Sinister Six is capable of." Chapter 55. Issue 55. Secret Wars Part 5. While Peter was being led to one of Hydra's focal labs, he waited patiently for his moment to strike. He was staring outside the cockpit window and saw that they were several miles out over the ocean. New York had all but vanished from sight when they passed through some kind of cloaking barrier, and a small island came into view. On it had a single massive complex building built that towered high into the sky. Peter stared at the facility with furious expression. A great deal of anger was boiling under his calm facade. He controlled his emotions and reined in darker thoughts as they landed, and before being guided out at gunpoint. "Welcome, Mr. Parker, to the Hydra Island." Real original, Peter thought as he resisted the urge to roll his eyes. "Although you're a prisoner, we have great expectations for someone with your mind and unique gifts. After all, since you follow my orders now, I intend to have you work as my assistant for a very long time," Maynard announced with an overabundance of confidence. The Hydra agents thought nothing of it, as they were under the assumption that Peter was being mind-controlled by Maynard. "I look forward to working with you," Peter said with an almost gentle smile while thinking, "those acting lessons with Mary Jane are really paying off." The villain led them inside the building with a pep in his step, and as they entered, Peter saw the highly advanced technology lying about. Stuff from the previous invasion was being heavily inspected and experimented with. There were items he suspected to be from Wakanda, materials from Chitauri weapons, and even some tech that was stolen from Tony's company. Peter was led into a lab room that was filled with surgery equipment. He saw how several children that were being exposed to torturous chemicals that only had a slim chance to activate their X gene. There were body parts floating in pods filled with a glowing green substance, and the cries of their victims could be heard every now and then. The Hydra agents left the room as Peter held his hands out and said, "If you would, Dr. Maynard?" "Of course, partner," Maynard responded like he and Peter had been best friends for years. He removed the power ceiling cuffs and then stepped back before saying, "Now, if you'll follow me, I'll take you to talk with my superior." Peter looked at the kids before him and separated from his symbiote. "Start healing every victim you come across." Webster nodded its head as it began covering the children, while Peter pulled out his spare costume. "Didn't think I'd be using my spare suit so soon." Peter looked at Maynard and said, "Let's go, I'm curious as to how you knew my identity." Maynard nodded his head and said, "Anything for you, Peter. After without you I would have died all those years ago." Peter had made Maynard into a loyal servant by implanting false memories of their partnership. He made the guy think that he had saved his life, and the two had been plotting the downfall of Hydra for years. Although he hated mind manipulation abilities, he had to admit, they had their uses. Peter walked alongside Maynard until they reached a large empty conference room. The table was long enough for around 20 or so people, and each seat had a device in front of it that was for holographic display of the High Council members of Hydra. Peter sat down and placed his feet up on the table while Maynard made the call. "Hello, is anyone there?" Peter said as a black shadow appeared in a holographic form. Only the eyes were visible. "So, Dr. Maynard, it appears you succeeded." The person spoke in a deep male German accent. "Yes, Mr. Parker is under my control now," Maynard replied. Peter stood up and did his best Hail Hydra impression and said, "Now that I'm part of the group, I was wondering, how did you manage to uncover my identity?" The Hydra Council member looked at Peter and said, "Why does he seem so normal?" "Mr. Parker's intelligence is one of a kind. To make sure not to lose any of it, I left his personality intact," Maynard replied. The Hydra official didn't seem to mind as he answered his question. "A certain operative that joined up recently gave us this information." "May I ask for his name?" Peter asked. The voice was starting to get annoyed. "You have no need to know. Follow orders, soldier." Peter used his space amethyst to find the location of the caller and used a portal spell. As white spell circle appeared around his hand, the man on the other side of the call appeared in the room with a shocked expression. Peter wasn't surprised in the least to see the Hydra agent Dr. Johann Faustus. Before he had a chance to do anything, Peter invaded his mind and reaped every bit of information the villain had, and took everything that was worth of value. After Peter finished his mind-scouring session, he discovered how they learned of their identity. Peter clenched his fist. "Eddie. Fucking Venom. Putting together a team to defeat the Avengers, huh?" Peter slammed his fist through the table as he turned to Faustus and said, "Call them all." Faustus nodded his head, completely compliant. "What is it, Faust? Why have you contacted us?" The room was suddenly filled up with Hydra's High Council. Peter waved his hand, activating his portal spell, and pulled them into the room before saying, "What's happening is the end of Hydra." Before they could make their move, Peter scavenged their minds and lifted his mask as he started barfing. The stuff he saw was truly deplorable. "You sick fucking degenerates. I've seen a lot of shit, read a lot of books about people like you, but to actually see it. I've seen tamer shit in a Hostel movie." Peter barfed some more. What he witnessed was some of the most sickening things he had ever seen: senseless killings, cruel experimentation on the innocent, REPE, torturing methods of the highest caliber, and many more heinous crimes that made Stalin look like a saint. Peter wanted nothing more than to start spilling blood, but he bit back his anger and said, "I'm not going to dirty my hands, but you can be sure I'll be dropping you all off in a state where the death penalty is still legal." All of the Hydra agents gulped. Only Maynard seemed pleased. "None of you have any connection to the Supreme Council, other than the black box that gives you your orders, But let me tell you this, it won't save them. I promise to wipe Hydra off the face of the earth, and I plan on following through. Peter walked out into the lab, called back his symbiote, and began his assault. To make sure that they don't radio out and alert the other Hydra bases too, Peter used an EMP to shut down everything on the island. He ran from person to person, extracting and destroying the demi-symbiotes. Some of the agents were wearing psionic-resistant gear and helmets, so Peter had to get rough with some of them. As he made his way through the rooms, particular Hydra prisoners were being free from their prisons. Someone's here. A giant 8-foot man wearing a full suit of metallic orange-red armor said as he stood up and walked out of the cell, crushing the ground beneath him as he stepped. Oh goody, I've been stuck here forever. I hope it's someone I may or may not have a guy crush on. A very familiar voice echoed in the prison chamber beside him. I've been waiting forever to make my appearance. Peter, who had been gathering up all of the victims of Hydra's experiments, was standing over another scientist scanning his memories. Other than getting as much info as he could, he saw that they had prisoners that none of the scientists here were allowed to go near, and apparently, he just released them with his EMP. He slapped his own forehead as he flung the scientist into a wall and webbed him up. The room suddenly shook as he said, "Oh crap." The wall beside him exploded as he removed his symbiote and shouted, "Go get the innocents to safety." Suddenly, a giant fist came inches away from hitting him. He jumped up to the ceiling and shouted, "Hey Jugs, is that any way to thank someone for freeing you?" Juggernaut stared down Spider-Man and said, "Oh, then I guess should thank you, Spider-Man. Why don't you come down here and accept my heart-fueled appreciation? I'd rather send you to Mars. And isn't it supposed to be heart-filled appreciation?" Peter started using the space amethyst and tried to teleport Juggernaut away, when all of a sudden, his body was suddenly surrounded by a red glow that contained the might of the elder god Sidorak. With a single jerk of his body, the spell surrounding him collapsed and he charged towards a nearby support pillar and tried to break it down. Peter webbed up his feet and pulled him off the ground. He then tried to use his magnetics to control and remove Juggernaut's armor when he found out that it was made of non-magnetic materials. Son of a... Quickly webbing up the latches, Peter tried to pull the walking tank's helmet free. However, before he could do so, Juggernaut pulled on his webbing and punched Peter in the chin, sending him flying through the roof. Peter grunted as he webbed the ground around Juggernaut and pulled himself into a flying rocket kick towards him. Juggernaut raised his arm the moment Peter's feet connected, blocking the blow while the ground splintered around them and pushed Juggernaut's body halfway into the ground. Peter tried to reach for his helmet, but Juggernaut was ready for him. He reached to grab Peter's arms, but Peter transformed them into lightning to avoid it. As the hero reached out, he felt the Juggernaut's hands pass through his own and then let his whole body burst into an electrical current. Juggernaut was confused as to what was happening when Peter reformed right in front of his face. Spider-Man quickly touched one of the fasteners around Juggernaut's helmet seconds before Juggernaut slapped his hands together that resulted in a loud sonic boom. The shockwave was powerful enough to dislodge and throw Peter's body into the air. However, he managed to take one of the latches with him. Peter grunted as he felt someone catch him. He turned around to see a red-costumed anti-hero who was a constant source of headaches for him. Deadpool. Peter shouted, seeing that he was around the same age as him. The costume instantly made him think of Ultimate Deadpool. "Hey, you know my name. I'm a big fan, Spider-Man. Can I have your autograph? I think it will be way more expensive after you're dead. Can I get your autograph and then kill you?" Peter raised fist, knocking Deadpool's neck back, making a loud snapping sound as he shouted, "Owie! Harsh." Deadpool snapped his head back and said, "You better play nice, author. You'll need my help for what's to come next, and you know it. I don't know who's writing this, but you better not fuck me over." Peter shouted, making Deadpool smile before saying, "You can break the fourth wall too?" Juggernaut threw a large chunk of debris at them, and as they dodged, Peter shouted, "Apparently, I can now." "But how come you aren't crazy like me?" Deadpool asked as he shot at Juggernaut's eyes, who in return placed his hands in the way so that they'd bounce off harmlessly. "I prefer to believe that there's a chance that they're nothing more than scribes peering into another universe, or maybe even making an entire universe as they write. After all, our brains are quantum computers, who knows what we're capable of." Peter webbed at Juggernaut's feet and tried to pull him back, but Juggernaut grabbed them and started to pull. Peter held onto it and tried to keep Juggernaut busy when Deadpool said, "Wow, I never thought of it like that. Yep, if everything is possible and exists in some way or form, then why should I care? I'm just going to live my life the way I want to the best of abilities, and without betraying my character. Hell, for all we know, the person writing my story is having their story written by someone as well. Interesting, very zen. Are you sure you're not Iron Fist?" Deadpool laughed. The back and forward banter made Juggernaut fume as he shouted, Will you two shut the fuck up? Ah, we're pissing the author off again. Deadpool pulled out his sword and started to chop at Juggernaut's legs. Was that supposed to do something? Juggernaut lifted a brow before trying to hammer smash the merc. Peter webbed his arms before they could descend on Deadpool and pulled him back. Wade's swords then used the force to pull back his blades, barely managing to cut the giant's thigh. When he clenched his wound, Peter hopped on his shoulders and reached for the helmet. Spider-Man started to pull on the second helmet latch, when suddenly, Juggernaut started running, which never a good thing. As the bulky brute smashed through a wall, he took the chance to grab Spider-Man and hold him in place while he bashed through multiple layers of the building. Peter escaped by turning into his lightning form. He then shot over next to Deadpool and asked, I think I can handle this if I play my cards right, so why did you say I would need your help earlier? Before Deadpool could answer, a beam of energy shot towards them. Peter jumped up to avoid when it shot a clean hole through Deadpool and made him shout, Why? Peter saw the person he recognized as Inferno, but in his universe, she was the also Herald of Balthak. There was woman wearing golden armor, and her body was partially made of energy. She walked up beside him along with 6 other villains and grinned at the hero. Peter recognized them as Mysterio, Stonecutter, the leader of the Hand Gorgon, Maudra the Mystic, Craven the Hunter, Styx the man with a touch of death, all of them radiating the energy of the Octessence. Oh, crap, the otter isn't going easy on you at all, Deadpool said as his stomach healed up. Peter sighed as he thought, I wonder how things are going with MJ. Chapter 56. Issue 56. Secret Wars Part 6. A few hours earlier. New York City, Brooklyn. MJ was halfway down the high-rise and had taken out more than half of the Hydra agents with ease. Things were going well until all of a sudden a hand reached through the ground and tried to grab MJ's foot. Her senses alerted her, but she didn't care. Once the giant hand grabbed her, MJ lifted her foot with lightning speed, kicking into the air as hard as she could. The giant Titania flew into the ceiling and started falling towards the ground when MJ webbed her up and threw her into the wall. Before the villain could say anything, the heroine webbed her mouth shut. It was clear she was still working off her anger from seeing her family being brought into this mess. Her spider senses went off again as 4 members of the Sinister Six came running through the building and attacked her at the same time. If Peter were here, he'd recognize them as the Wrecking Crew. She jumped over the bulldozer and webbed his mouth and nose while kicking off his head and leaping over him. She continued with a soaring dropkick to the center of Piledriver's face, sending it into the ground before she bounced off the roof and stomped his head through several floors below. A chain connected to a ball flew at MJ with insane power. However, MJ didn't dodge. She used her telekinesis to speed up the ball and redirect it towards the wrecker, who in return took his crowbar and used it as a bat to try and redirect the metal ball at MJ. However, the moment the 2 magical items made contact, a massive shockwave destroyed the ground beneath them, sending them falling onto the floor below. MJ grunted as she tumbled across the ground. She looked up to see the absorbing man whose entire body was made of steel ripping off her webbing from Titania's body. He then used his ability to copy MJ's organic webbing. His entire body turned from the silverish steel color into a cobalt blue and was covered in spider web markings. However, he soon found out that, although the new material was powerful, he couldn't move from that spot, so using the chain around his body as a medium, he changed the bottoms of his feet back to steel, allowing him to start walking towards MJ. MJ frowned as she said, You can mimic the substances that you touch? Cool power, I'ma steal it. Absorbing man charged and punched the floor, destroying it, making her jump back and land on the wall before saying, It doesn't matter how durable or powerful your body becomes, you're nowhere near as fast as me. Keep talking, girly, you're surrounded. How long do you think you can last? Absorbing man laughed when MJ took a deep breath before saying, You are all morons, you're strong all right, but if I take away your ability to create momentum, then your strength means nothing. Using her telekinesis, she lifted them into the air and covered them in a sphere of water that was constantly pushing against their movements. She then added dirt to create a thick mud-like substance. The Sinister Six was bogged down so tightly that they could barely move. MJ then sent out a string of her symbiote to steal and see if she could remove their powers. She felt her body grow ridiculously strong as she managed to capture the Absorbing Man and Titania powers. But the Wrecking Crew's power came from magic, old and very powerful magic. So, to deal with that, she began sealing their magic with several spell restrictions, along with her organic webbing's anti-magical effects. She couldn't completely seal their strength but managed to make them much weaker and easier to deal with. MJ looked at the distraught expression of the Sinister Six faces that brought a smile to hers. To top it off, MJ cuffed them with her power-suppressing cuffs. Do you know who you're fucking with? What's in store for you? Absorbing Man shouted. She walked over to the power-sealed Wrecking Crew, webbed them all up together with the other 2 and spoke with a threatening tone. I don't care who you are, Hydra fucked up by picking a fight with us, and now I'm going to tear this place down. MJ raised her hands and used her geokinesis and started dispatching all of the Hydra agents by encasing 90% of their bodies in steel rebar and stone. She then looked out the window of the high-rise to see a few dozen SHIELD jets arriving as they flew around the building. MJ shook her head, better late than never. She then walked up to the top of the building and opened the Hydra jet while a rope descended from a Quinjet above her and Fury came sliding down it. It's okay, the bad guys are all gone now, these nice people from HIELD will take care of you, MJ said to her family and the rest of the hostages as she nodded her head at Fury. Fury walked over to her as the rooftop began filling up with HIELD agents and said, "Good work, Spider-Woman, we'll take it from here." A group of agents came up to deal with them when MJ sat inside the Hydra jet. She then looked back to Fury as she said, "Spider-Man is over an island out in the middle of the ocean taking care of his own Hydra base. Send someone to go help him. I'm heading to a black site where high-value prisoners are being kept." MJ sent spatial coordinates to Fury using Spiderling's tech while she made her way to the cockpit and took hold of the controls. Fury sat beside her and said, "If you're going after the black site, then I'm coming with you. I'll leave Agent Hill in charge to deal with what's going on at Spider-Man's end." MJ flipped a couple of switches and started up the engine. "Okay, Fury, but the site is a hostage center for many of the Hydra scientists. That's how they work. If you don't follow orders, then they kidnap your loved ones and use them as leverage to force your compliance. I know how Hydra thinks, kid." MJ flew off following the concordance entered by the Hydra pilot. Mask or no mask, Fury noticed MJ's sorrowful expression as she stared at her family on the monitor. "You okay?" Fury asked. "I'll be fine when I rescue Peter's parents, but I'm more worried what we're going to do about our identity crisis," MJ said while setting up the autopilot. Fury sighed, "We could always fake your death, and you and Peter could come work for S.H.I.E.L.D. MJ smiled. "Nice try, Fury, but we'll figure it out." "Hey, Nick?" "Yes," Fury responded. MJ placed her hand over his eye patch and used her symbiote to heal his wounded eye. "Thanks for coming with us and supporting us through all this." Fury felt his eye regrowing and healing. He removed his eye patch and said, "Well, I'll be damned. I'm gonna have to overhaul the security measures." "Worth it," MJ chuckled. "Worth it," Fury nodded his head. The two flew off, taking hours to reach their destination. They conversed back and forth until their plan to rescue the civilians was settled. Before signaling the troops to invade, the jet had gone far out of New York and ended up in an empty and secluded lot in Washington, D.C. The ground opened up and a large elevator appeared with a landing pad on it. After landing, the elevator started to descend as the ground closed over their heads. MJ turned invisible while Fury seemed surprised and said, "Nice trick." Pushing a button on his suit, Fury also activated his own SHIELD tech, camouflaging his body. MJ used her suit's inferred function to see Fury, and as it turned out, the super spy had a similar function on the visor he had placed around his eyes. As the jet's doors opened, MJ hopped out, and Fury was right beside her as two leapt off the moving elevator onto a ledge near of a large air vent. She climbed up, ripped out the hatch, and lowered a web line down for him to follow. The two invaders crawled along until they uncovered a group of security lasers. MJ spread her symbiote along the vent, reaching for the nearest port to hack into. As Spiderling covered a power boxes, the lasers shut off without sending a warning to the security room and allowed them safe passage. They made their way through the vent when MJ stopped beside a series of cables and said, "We can hack in through here and download the building schematics." Fury pulled out a small hand-sized computer and pulled them out a USB cord and placed it into the access panel's port. After pulling up a map of the base, they saw that there were over 30 floors, and the building was constructed like a maze with dozens of winding hallways and hundreds of dead ends. "They built this to keep people in," Fury said with a grin. "And that's a good thing. Why? Because their defenses for intruders are lacking. Cocky bastards. Too bad for them, they weren't expecting us to bust in like this," Spider-Woman smiled. "I'll call in a strike team and give them our location." Fury quickly found what they were looking for and said, "The 10th floor is where they're keeping the hostages. The rest of the rooms are for the Hydra training, R&D facilities, and indoctrination classrooms. You stay here, I'll take care of the captives. I need you hold off one inviting the strike teams until I get the hostages to safety," MJ said as she began rapidly crawling through the vents and disarming any security devices she saw along the way. "When you reach the 10th floor, I'll cause a distraction to pull the guards away from your location." She nodded in appreciation as she started making her way towards the 10th floor. MJ crawled around of the vents and started exploring, slowly making her way down floor by floor. The security was far from lax. and dozens of armed Hydra agents roamed the facility. That was, until a loud explosion suddenly went off on the higher floors. Apparently, Fury had detonated the Hydra jet they flew in on, sending the base's security force into a state of chaos. The Hydra agents nearby were called up by their superiors to deal with the situation, and most of the agents left the area. Only a few remained, allowing her to pick up the pace. It wasn't until she noticed that there was a high-tech prison door that looked like a screen of white neon energy surrounded by a mechanical box. The vents had grown too narrow to explore further, so she had no choice but to exit. After crawling out the vents and onto the ceiling, she silently began taking out the remaining Hydra agents while webbing them up in the shadows. As the group of modern-day Nazis made muffled screams from their webbed cocoons, MJ then began inspecting the wall of unknown energy. However, no matter how she examined the door, MJ couldn't make heads or tails of the technology. She had never seen anything like this before. She was about to use her symbiote start to try hacking the gateway panel, when all of a sudden, her spidey senses went off. MJ jumped back seconds before a beam of energy blasted a hole in the spot she was just standing on. MJ saw dozens of machines break away from the wall and turn into flying turrets. Okay, this must be that mutant Forge's work Peter warned me about, MJ thought to herself. The room suddenly turned into a laser light show as MJ jumped around dodging the beams perfectly. With barely any room to spare, the lasers came inches away from her flesh almost every time she dodged, and to top it off, the strange lasers somehow managed to cause her symbiote to feel pain, which in turn caused her severe pain. MJ quickly webbed up to the ceiling and hopped on top of one of the turrets before placing Spiderling into it and hacking the device. As advanced as the tech was, it was no match for a sentient symbiote with the most advanced AI Peter built. Within a second, the symbiote took over the turret and began shooting down the remaining drones. Jumping from drone turret to wall turret, she continued to convert them under her control. After repeating this action for a while, only she and her controlled turrets remained. MJ then aimed them towards the door and blasted it open with a combined blast of every laser in the room. As the smoke cleared, she walked in. She saw an extremely complex prison which had cells made out of strange tech that generated a powerful force fields around both the equipment and captives. MJ saw a few hundred cells that completely filled up all the space on the 10th floor, and after looking for a few minutes, she managed to find Peter's parents. Seeing photos of them all throughout Aunt May and Ben's house, she recognized them instantly. They looked older than any picture she had seen them in, weakened, starved, and were missing their eyes. She had to hold tears forming in her eyes as she tried to get close to them, but discovered she couldn't touch the barriers. Every time she approached it, her spider senses blared off, warning her of an imminent threat. Even her symbiote retracted negatively. MJ shot off an impact webbing bullet and watched as the barrier dematerialized the matter right before her eyes. She frowned before looking around. Okay, MJ, you found them, now I need to figure out how to get them out. MJ switched through a few different visions filters such as X-ray, thermal, ultraviolet, but nothing showed. She couldn't even find a single device or power line leading to these cages. For a moment, she feared the worst. Could it be? The power is being transmitted through the air? Wireless energy. Suddenly, Spiderling managed to hack further into their system and discovered that some form of a psychic link was responsible for supplying the energy to the cell barriers. Not just that, but it was also controlling all of the technology in the building. By tracing that mental radiation put out by alpha and beta waves, I should be able to discover the location of the power source. Spiderling, run scans. Her HUD showed her an image of a red wave of energy rushing through the room. So she quickly began looking for its source, running through the room until she ended up inside a hall with a single vault lock door at the end of it. It looked like the ones you'd usually see in banks, only dozens of times more complex. She walked up to it and saw that it was entirely made of proto-adamantium, vibranium mixture. If the whole room is covered in this stuff, you'd be safe from a 10-megaton nuclear explosion if you were to hide in here, MJ stated as she raised her hand, but you can't keep me out. Pulling the entire vault door into the bag of infinite space, she saw something that made her almost puke. Chapter 57, Issue 57, Secret Wars Part 7. Meanwhile, back with Peter, he was staring down 8 heralds of the Elder Gods, the Octessants. Juggernaut Herald of Sidorak the Rage Father. Herald of Icon, Master of Illusions. Mysterio. Ragador, the God of Technology's Herald. Stonecutter. Hexex, follower of the Cult of Entropy. Herald of Volter, God of Toxins and Decay. Gorgon, leader of the Hand, and the Herald of Kraken, the God of Prisons and the jailer of all those who oppose him. Next was the Herald of Balthak, the God of Energies and Unknown Forces. Inferno. Modred the Mystic as the Herald of Watum, the God of Magic and Spellcraft. And lastly was Craven the Hunter, the herald of Farala, the god of beasts and the hunt. Mysterio waved his hands at the anti-hero/hero duo, and suddenly Spider-Man and Deadpool found themselves outside the Earth's atmosphere and started falling without control. They could feel the heat of re-entry, the GS of falling hundreds of miles per hour, and couldn't breathe properly either. Peter was in disbelief that an illusion could grab hold of him since the suit was supposed to give him psionic resistances, yet the force of Icon's godly might was able to burst through its defenses with ease. Spider-Man closed his eyes and only used his spider sense to focus in on reality. After waking himself back up, he noticed that his suit was piping hot, and Deadpool was burning up as if the illusion were real. It looks like I'll have to go looking for more materials. The purity levels of the metal in my suit and the effects of my organic webbing are too low to stand up against something godlike. His spider sense went off like nothing he's ever felt before as he saw Styx reaching out towards him with a visible black-colored energy of decay radiating from his fingertips. Jumping back while pulling Deadpool with him, the hero landed on the wall, then quickly webbed up a circlet of organic webbing for Deadpool to wear. For good measure. He then enchanted with a few dozen mental resistance spells onto it. Seeing that he was still in the illusion, Peter started to slap Deadpool. "Oh! Hit me harder, Daddy!" Deadpool shouted, making Peter almost puke. Seeing that it's still till no effect, he then decided to hard boot him by snapping his neck. "What happened?" Deadpool jumped up. "You got hit with an illusion. I reset your brain." Deadpool laughed. "Oh, you killed me, like an on and off button for a frozen computer, neat. You can turn me on whenever you want webs." Peter gave him a deadpan stare before saying, "I think I just threw up a little." He then pointed to the webbing around his head and said, "That will give you some resistance against psionics. Try not to fall into it again. If you suspect you're in an illusion, then just kill yourself to get out." Peter turned to them to try and use his telepathy to knock them out. However, not all of them shared Juggernaut's weakness. They all wore magical suits that granted them incredible resistances against just about everything. Peter gritted his teeth and said, "So Deadpool, any advice?" "Don't die, and do team-ups with me more often," Deadpool shouted as he started shooting his pistols at them. The entire island turned into a scene of pure mayhem that shook the whole building several times. Peter and Deadpool were doing everything they could to dodge the onslaught of their attacks. Magic, tech, and many mystical energies assaulted them in waves. It was taking everything they had just to stay alive. Juggernaut and Kraven teamed up using their powerful strength and speed to collapse half of the building structure, while Peter tried to web out and create support pillars out of his webbing. He managed to keep the whole place from coming down, but Kraven suddenly leapt through the air, cutting them with a strange energy that surrounded his claws. Reacting instantly, Spider-Man webbed his back and sent the villain flying towards Juggernaut. The two hit each other and tumbled over, surprising Peter that such a thing was even possible. Like a light bulb illuminating the darkness, Peter came to the realization of something that just might work. Deadpool. Web of Spider-Man issue number 91. Peter shouted as he watched him trying to tango with the rest of the Octessence heralds. Wade dodged their attacks and managed to cut the surface of their armor before saying, "You mean that time when you used a bad guy to defeat another?" "Oh. I get it." Deadpool pulled down his pants and showed his cancer-ridden ass and started spanking his butt at Inferno. "Hey honey, how about a full moon pie, all you can eat?" Inferno charged up a powerful beam of energy and shot it like a Gatling gun at Deadpool, who in turn started jumping around until he stood directly in front of Gorgon. The anti-hero then hugged his opponent before saying, "I love you, Gorgon. I won't let her hurt you." The blast shot through him, leaving several holes in the Merc with a mouth while the beams continued on, knocking Gorgon into the wall. "Darn it, I couldn't save you. Can you forgive me for being so weak, Snookums?" Deadpool laughed. The herald jumped back out looking a little exhausted and shouted, "I will seal you in a hell for all eternity for that, Deadpool." Spider-Man saw how damaged Deadpool managed to make the herald inflict upon Gorgon started to self-heal, along with his armor. He also noticed that the clamps he had thrown to the ground earlier were moving back towards Juggernaut. In response to such events, the hero thought quickly and pulled them into his bag of infinite space before he was forced to dodge the attacks of multiple heralds. Once again, the Juggernaut and the Hunter charged him. Kraven was fast and carried a wild aura around him as he swiped his claws that could cut through adamantium with ease. The Hunter unleashed a flurry of swipes and moved around the room like a wild animal, leaping at him whenever given the chance. Peter dodged them all with barely any room to maneuver while Styx tried to sneak up on Peter and touch his back. However, Spider-Man was at the top of his game. Seconds before the creepy hand touched him, Peter webbed Styx's body and tossed him towards the charging Juggernaut. "Here's a present for ya, Jugs." Peter shouted as Kraven dashed out of the way, avoiding Styx's claw-like hands, and much to the hero's surprise, Juggernaut actually ducked under him and slid towards Peter in an attempt to dodge him. Peter jumped over Juggernaut and webbed up Styx's body again, and started to use him as a weapon against the other two. Juggernaut and Craven were now dodging Peter's attacks as he swung Styx like a wrecking ball of instant decay. The only thing that managed to resist the Herald's power was his webbing. However, he had to constantly add more whenever he felt the atomic bonds in them weakening. Hey, Styxy, you ever think about working for a demolition company? You'd make a fortune. Ah! Styx screamed as the ground and materials around wherever he touched turned to dust. The two exemplars dodged with everything they had and avoided the Herald of Degeneration like he was the plague. Styx had had enough and chose to decay the part where the webbing line was rather than the mass surrounding his body. The end result was the Herald sending himself flying onto the ground, mere feet away from Deadpool. The Merc with the mouth was surprised by the decaying reeking ball move Spider-Man pulled off, lost track of Inferno because he wasn't paying attention, and was hit by a powerful blast of energy. He was sent flying back into the distance while Peter swung by and caught him. As they landed on the half-destroyed second floor, Stonecutter began using scraps and other technology lying around to start building some kind of massive arena. When suddenly, the whole building broke down and reformed into the massive flat platform that started floating up into the sky. Let the God Machine be built, and let the war over mankind begin, Stonecutter said before laughing. Peter saw the Hydra Council members and a few remaining victims standing off in the distance. Thankfully, Webster appeared and wrapped up the remaining captives before leaping off the ledge and safely landed alongside the remaining victims. Peter raised his hand and felt the symbiote return to his body in an instant. As this happened, the Hydra Council members tried to run. However, Peter's earlier mental commands held them still. Craven, like an apex predator, had smelled at the feast set before him. The weakness radiating from them triggered his animal instincts, and he attacked as if he were in a trance. Before Peter could do anything to save them, all of the Hydra agents had been carved up into chunks. Craven started to laugh. The more I kill, the stronger I become. Peter didn't have any remorse about letting them die. They were going to be executed by the state after all. However, he didn't want them to die by the hands of a villain, especially when that makes his opponent stronger. Spider-Man gripped his fists before webbed Craven's hands up as he began to pull him over towards the bottom of his foot. Craven bit through the webbing with his fangs and landed on the ground on all fours before he started to charge at Peter like an animal. When all of the sudden Stonecutter shouted, "Stop at once, mortal. Your efforts are futile. Once the God Machine is complete, all of humankind will be divided amongst us 8 as our troops, and the whole of humanity will lose all free will throughout the duration of our war. Only until one remains as the victor, the war will continue, and I would rather not waste any good soldiers. They may end up on my side. So, if you would stop any unproductive struggling, I would greatly appreciate it." Peter frowned. He could stop this and start destroying the building, but Stonecutter could always rebuild it however he saw fit. He growled and racked his brain to try and think of a way to put an end to all this madness when Strange appeared from out of a teleportation circle. "Challenge them, Peter," Dr. Strange shouted. "You are the champion totem of a god, a herald just like them, and if you challenge them to combat you can state the terms." The herald for Wattam suddenly shouted, "Dr. Strange, it has been too long. You really shouldn't have turned down Wattam's offer. If you had, at least 1/8 of humanity would have been spared from combat and would have had a chance of avoiding extinction as a race. But because of your actions, humanity is destined to perish." Mordred started to laugh menacingly. "Bastard offspring of Morgan and Arthur." Strange looked absolutely livid. It appeared there was some harsh history between the two. It became more apparent as Strange continued to berate him. "You betrayed the Ancient One's trust, and are a heretic to all spellcasters. You dare to accept Wattam's power? I should have killed you all those years ago. But you didn't. You failed to match my power and trapped me in the Dark Realm like some coward. Though, if not for that stupid Asgardian fumbling about the realms like a blind child, I may never have found my way back. I'll have to pay them a visit and thank them after this is over." Peter gulped. "Challenge them all by myself. Even if I use the gems I understand, I know jack squat on to use the reality, or soul Merlin gems, right? Let's not forget that I only have less than 1 minute of the power from Merlin's stone I can use. I don't suppose you know of any other totems that can help, because in case you haven't noticed, I'm up against 8 Elder God Heralds and can't exactly fight them all by myself." The Octessence members started laughing. Puny mortal wishes to challenge the great Octessence. Juggernaut shouted with a voice that wasn't his own. All of a sudden, a bright light beamed out from the 8 artifacts. Their powers originated from the ivory idol of Icon, the fearsome fist of Farala, the kestrel key of Kraken, verdant vial of Valter, the blinding brazier of Balthak, the crimson crystal of Sidorak, the ringed ruby of Ragador, and a miniature model of the waterfall of Wattam. The 8 godlike beings appeared in a transparent form that only showed the top half of their bodies. A totem from Kokiang Woody spawn dares to challenge us. Something suddenly clicked inside her Peter. Kokiang Woody, Spider Grandmother. The Native American goddess of spiders, in Hopi mythology, Spider Grandmother, Hopi Kokiang Woody, is the creator of humans, identified with earth goddesses and other sky mothers, such as Hera, or Freya, and Gaia. Peter grabbed his chin and thought back to the history he read in Navajo mythology. Spider-Woman, Narashjai Azza, is the constant helper and protector of humans. The Dine Bahane creation narrative of the Navajo, recorded 1928, includes a mention of both a Spider-Man and Spider-Woman, who introduced the spindle and the loom. According to the Zuni, string games were given to them by Grandmother Spider. Peter's foot started tapping against the ground. Master Weaver, totems. They're focal points in the web of life. I already suspected, but now, to hear it firsthand, it all makes sense. Strange was right, those dead languages and gods were worth all the time spent learning. A large image of a younger Madam Web appeared behind Peter. I do think that my totem is far stronger than yours, he's just outnumbered. What are you proposing? What are the stakes? Icon spoke out, I will summon 6 totems from the web of life. My champion shall select them as his allies, and you shall fight. If my totems win, you will have to find another planet to choose to do battle on, and with a primitive species only. You gods of chaos are always saying that chaos can breed progress. How about you put your words to the test? The Spider Grandmother responded. All of them grumbled. It could take hundreds or thousands of years for a new planet to start gaining the worship of us. What if we win? Kraken, the most human-looking out of all the elder gods, said as he crossed his arms. If you win, I will designate one entire universe to your octessence to rule. The spider goddess smiled as she stared them down. Tempting, but what if we refuse? Balthak questioned. I don't think you will. Not unless you want me to go around spreading to every other pantheon, that not only are you weak but cowardly as well. Kokiang Woody said, grinning. You dare insult us, Kokiang Woody? Sidorak slammed his hand down on his throne. He was sitting on as the rest of the elder gods began to shout in complaints. Peter scratched his head and thought, maybe our ability to insult is the reason the Spider-Men and women get picked. I mean, I barely know of any spider heroes that don't smack talk like champs. We accept your challenge, Kokiang Woody. The elder gods shouted, making the spider goddess laugh. She then turned to Totem and said, well, other than the Guardian, who is your choice for the remaining 6? Peter gulped as he started to think. My girlfriend is kind of busy right now. Can we hold off on this battle for now? And there are a lot of universes to choose from. Can you give me a few days to decide it? We will give you 3 hours to decide it. The elder gods shouted. Peter grunted before sending out a message to MJ. MJ, I could use your help on this one. How are things on your end? Chapter 58. Issue 58. Secret Wars Part 8. A few minutes earlier, over at the Washington Hydra base, MJ was holding back her barf as she stared at what was left of the mutant forge. Most of his body had been replaced by machinery, and was plastered to a wall like some form of avant-garde art. She was about to take a step forward when her spider sense warned her to stop. She frowned because no matter which way she imagined herself moving closer resulted in her spider sense going wild. Can you hack it, Spiderling? MJ asked. My apologies, but the psionic energy here is too strong for me to override. The best course of action is to directly access the technology by removing the mutant from the machine. Okay then, time to move. MJ thought as she webbed towards the panel on the wall. As the web traveled, hundreds of the turrets carrying disintegration lasers opened fire on the webbing, turning each and every strand into a pile of ash. MJ jumped out and began to dodge the lasers while taking small advances forward at a time. A laser shot at her feet, forcing her to jump up when another laser shot at her in mid-air. Thinking quickly, she webbed the wall and pulled herself slightly over and dodged it within seconds of hitting her. As she landed, she rolled forward and webbed the ceiling and pulled, dragging her upward with a diagonal direction while avoiding multiple laser shots. MJ then heard Peter contact her. MJ, I could use your help on this one. How are things on your end? MJ was in the middle of performing unnatural gymnastic feats that could win her an Olympian medal when she responded. Hello, you have reached Spider-Woman's answering machine. I'm currently busy dodge laser beams of death. Please call back at a later time. MJ was slowly inching her way forward when a wall of light appeared that was quickly rising from the floor. She webbed the roof and pulled herself over the wall before it blocked her off. A series of these walls began closing in front of her, forcing her to move even faster. MJ leapt over the last barrier and was seconds away from reaching the computer panel that was set up next to Forge's body, when suddenly, a blast of energy radiated from around him. The walls behind her started to close in. Her spidey senses were blaring like crazy when she quickly decided to open her bag of infinite space and pull in the screen of energy. I can't believe that worked. Ha ha ha. MJ breathed a sigh of relief. Reaching out her hand, Mary Jane placed the symbiote over the computer panel and forced the defense system to shut down. She then walked over to Forge and began covering him in the symbiote. She felt appalled as the medical assessment came up on her HUD. The spine, heart, and brain were the only remaining organic parts left on the mutant. MJ quickly started to recover his body by infusing him with her chi. However, the damage done to this guy was beyond insane. It took her 2 hours to heal all of the damage, so as a bonus she ended up copying Forge's X gene. She now found that she gained an intuition of sorts when it came to controlling and building machinery that surpassed common sense. She then removed her symbiote to reveal a completely healed Forge. Why isn't he waking up? The mutant's mind is fractured, broken. He will not wake up without special assistance. A telepath would be helpful in healing his mind, Spiderling replied. MJ sighed as she lifted his body up with her telekinesis and carried him back with her. As she approached the cells, she used her newfound power to disable the machines and start saving every prisoner she could. After reaching her way to Peter's parents, MJ wrapped them up with her symbiote and began to heal their wounds. When their eyes returned along with their health, they stared at the person in front of them in awe. That's our project. Marie, Peter's mother, shouted in surprise. She had long chestnut brown hair and green eyes. Although she was in her 30s, she still looked amazing, especially now that her body was returned to full health. Not to mention, the extra chi MJ gave her probably shaved off a few years. N1. Who are you? Richard, Peter's father, shouted in worry, thinking that Hydra had figured out the symbiote creation method. Richard looked a lot like Peter, only with a wider jawline and barely noticeable dimple on his chin. MJ smiled and said, I'm Spider-Woman, and I'm here with S.H.I.E.L.D. I'm a superhero that's part of a new group of world protectors called the Avengers. The two looked at each other in surprise. All the rest of the captives that were more recent arrivals already knew of the Avengers wanted to start cheering for joy when they heard this, but MJ placed her finger over her mouth and shushed them. We still have to get you guys out of here. There are over 500 of you, so I need you all to line up. What are the Avengers? Marie asked, when someone in line asked, how you not know who the Avengers are? Just how long have you been here? MJ started leading them out while some people explained the alien attack to them. They lined up and started making their way through the facility. All that happened in the last 12 years. Marie spoke up. Oh God, Peter. Do you think he's okay? Richard began to worry even more. Before he could finish the thought, everyone felt their bodies becoming lighter and started to float behind MJ. Please relax everyone, starting right now, I'm going to get you all home, MJ said as she began using her telekinesis to start flying them all up into the vents she came through. As she led them up the massive complex duct system, she was glad that they had plenty of room to spread them all out side by side. Other than the constant gasp and subtle cheers, she made her way back to Fury without encountering any major issues. When she arrived at the entrance, she saw the bald leader messing with the Hydra agents by taking over certain security protocols, locking them in various rooms, and attacking them with automated turrets. Having fun? MJ asked, making Fury smile. Yes. It's about time you got back. He closed the mini-computer and placed in a pouch around his waist before asking, that everyone? MJ nodded her head when Fury said, Avengers, bust down the door. Knock knock. Tony's voice was heard over the comms. A large explosion was heard that was followed by intense gunfire, and people yelling out in pain. MJ smiled at the sound of Hydra getting there but whooped and said, let's get out of here now. After exiting the facility, Iron Man landed next to them as a wave of unmanned drones flew inside the Hydra base and began clearing it out. Spider-Woman. It's good to see you. Where is your partner? MJ looked back at Peter's parents before sending a text to Tony's HUD. Really? Tony responded. MJ then thought of the message she got from Peter earlier and said, okay Peter, mission accomplished. Your parents are safe and sound now. I'm leaving them in Tony's hands for now. Peter responded instantly, thank God, I'm glad you're all safe. Peter truly meant that he took a deep breath and felt a wave of relief as he continued, I'm coming to pick you up. 2 hours earlier after the message to MJ, Peter was fervently trying to come up with a way to pick out the totems he would summon. He had already figured out 4, but the last 2 would be problematic. He asked if the Spider Goddess could help him view what his total selection is when the other Elder Gods started calling foul play on him. The goddess then smiled and said, you can already access the web by using the Space and Reality Stone. If it is just viewing the different realms, then you could easily accomplish such a task. Peter sighed and spent almost 2 hours trying to construct a spell that he could use. And even Strange got in on the action. He gave Peter several tips before they put the finishing touches on the spell matrix. With a smile on his face, he turned to Strange and said, "Thanks, I don't think I could have created the spell this quickly without your aid." "Don't sell yourself short, Parker. You did a great job thinking up the outline of the spell. Even without me, given enough time, you could have completed it by yourself," Strange replied, slapping Peter on the back. "Okay then, let's take a peek at my choices," Peter said as he activated the spell. His space and reality Merlin stones powered the glyph as his mind drifted throughout the planes as he came across a massive web spanning out into infinity. Peter placed his hand over it and said, "Better make this quick. I have less than 50 seconds remaining." As he touched the web of life, he felt his mind spilled off into countless realities to see those who shared his connection to the web. After drifting throughout the realities for 42 seconds, he pulled himself back to his body by canceling the spell out. Standing up, he smiled and said, "I got it." Peter then told Madam Web of his choices. First was the easy win. In Universe 919, there was a version of Peter Parker during the Secret Wars arc where he gained the powers of the Beyonder and managed to keep his mind human by putting on several limiters that kept him from abusing the power. After defeating Doctor Strange, he recreated reality as it was, and returned home as an invincible hero, never reviving Ben, and altering the fate of his reality, merely stepping forward in his life. Next is Ghost Spider from Earth 11638. In this reality, Peter Parker's Uncle Ben never died, became corrupted by power, and raised Peter up with evil intentions. After becoming the Amazing Spider, a famous and popular and rich superhero, they used their resources, built a transporter to bring Spider-Man from other universes and absorb their powers to increase his. He grew stronger and stronger with every Peter Parker he absorbed until bringing the Spider-Man of Earth 616. After talking with the Prime Totem, the Amazing Spider made him believe that he arrived at his universe by accident. Of course, that was a trick. 616 Peter was knocked out and woke up in the Amazing Spider's lair, where he was attached to a machine which would absorb his powers. The 616 Peter managed to convince his other of his errors, and when Ben was about to plug a distracted Spider-Man into the machine, the Amazing Spider disrupted the process and had his powers absorbed by the machine instead. After that event came to a close, he didn't die but was stuck in a comatose state as a consequence for his actions. His body was a vegetable, but his spirit, however, was trapped in hell, where he felt that it was the punishment he deserved. Sometime later, after some certain events took place, he was given a chance for redemption and became the Spider-Ghost, a Spider-Man with the powers of the Ghost Rider. In the universe Scarlet, which created during the House of M event, Earth 58163, which normally should have vanished after Scarlet, which returned the 616 universe to how it was supposed to be, but instead became a reality in of itself and continued on its own natural history. In that world, Gwen never died, married Peter Parker, had a child together, and lived a happy life. Their son Richie Parker inherited Spider-Man's powers, became a hero in his own right as he grew up, and eventually became the next Sorcerer Supreme. On Earth 51977, Peter Parker was chosen as the Nova Prime sometime after he was bitten by the spider. After jumping in front of Mugger, a tragic event took place, involving a ricochet bullet that killed the criminal. He turned himself into the police to be punished for his crime, but was released shortly thereafter, as it was an act of self-defense. Unable to cope with being a murderer, he could no longer continue on as a hero and hung up the costume. He lived a mostly normal life. He met with Mary Jane, fell in love, got married, and when his first child was born, he took up the costume once again to be a hero for her. Sometime later, Peter's daughter became the owner of the black self-sustaining Nova Corps helmet, and the two became crime-fighting heroes together. Since he couldn't bring Nova Force over, he had to bring his daughter Mayday Parker over to help. Next was Warlock Spider-Man, Earth 8545. The entire world was overrun with something called the Legacy Virus, where an Omega-level existence named Warlock sacrificed himself to merge their bioforms in an effort to save his best friend Cypher's life. Instead, the virus mutated to become a new disease, a disease that was no longer fatal, but didn't limit itself to mutants and was infinitely more contagious. Becoming vampiric in nature, it hungered for additional life energy and forced those infected to hunt for more victims. After a long period of time, Spider-Man managed to come to his sense and overpower the hive mind. He then went on to create a vaccine curing every one of the virus, thus saving the world. This Peter Parker managed to keep his powers of Warlock and went on to become a big-time hero. Lastly, from the universe he helped create, Earth 616.2's Kane Scarlet Spider, also known as the version that went on to master the power of the other, and even got a nice spiffy magical suit made by a Spider-Man that learned magic, that not only enhanced his powers but the other's power as well. As they all were about to be summoned, MJ called him back. "I'm on my way to pick you up." With that, he teleported to MJ's side, to see his parents standing close to her. Chapter 59, Issue 59, Secret Wars Part 9. Seeing his parents standing before him, Peter started to cry. Tears of happiness overtook his eyes and made him smile under his mask as he hugged his parents, confusing the hell out of them. Seeing the looks of bafflement on their faces, he backed off and cleared his voice before saying, "Well, since Hydra has ousted our identities, I guess there's no point in letting them use it as a weapon against us." Peter's mask retreated and shocked his parents as he said, "Mom, Dad, Marie and Richard jumped over and grabbed Peter and gripped him tightly. "My baby!" Marie shouted while Richard just cried tears of joy. Peter's face froze before it turned into a soft expression as he held his parents. He just smiled as the tears ran down his face. MJ smiled and then said, "Peter, what did you mean by our identities had been ousted?" Peter sent her the memories of what happened. MJ frowned and stomped her foot before saying, "Him again." She then removed her mask and said, "Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Parker. It's been a while." Marie was stunned as she placed her hand on MJ's face. "Mary, my little firecracker. You're the spitting image of your mother." Some tears formed when MJ thought of their past. She was rather young, but she still remembered Marie as a kind and loving mother to just about everyone in the neighborhood. MJ's mother Madeline and Peter's mother Marie were best friends, so she really got to know her when she was young. Richard was wide-eyed at the strange revelation as he questioned them. "Could someone tell me what's going on? Peter, where did you get that suit? It looks like our symbiote, but I thought we burned all the samples." Marie felt the surface of the suit and said, "It's similar but so much more advanced. There is a metallic component to its biological structure." Peter scratched his head and said, "I think it's better if we relocate." Tony, Clint and Natalia stared at Peter and MJ with both a surprise and happy expression on his face. "Your identity was blown, huh? What are you going to do now, kid?" Peter created a portal causing his parents' mouth to drop. "I don't know, why don't you set a press conference for me? Happy's good with dealing with that stuff, right? You want to use my guy? Get your own." "Oh yeah, Fury had the agents dropped your family off at Avengers Tower. Safer there right now." Tony shouted. "Thanks, Tony," Peter said as he changed the portal's destination. On the other side of the portal showed the lounge inside Avengers Tower before he stepped through it. He then looked back at his amazed parents and said, "I'm not going to hold this thing open forever." Peter laughed as MJ led them through the portal and closed it behind them. "Peter, what was that? Weren't we just in Washington, D.C.? How did we get to New York?" Marie questioned as she looked out of the tower's 21st floor. MJ walked up behind her and said, "Magic." Richard and Marie looked at MJ with a skeptical look, as they were both people of science. Peter rubbed his nose as he said, "It's true, I know it's a little hard to believe, but just think of it as science that you don't understand yet, or like programs uses the body's brainwaves to operate." Peter started to use his magic and create constructs out of light. "This is..." Peter chuckled at them as he took a seat on the couch next to them. "A lot has happened since you've been gone." Richard and Marie sat next to him looking depressed as he said this. Peter sighed and gave them a hug before saying, "I will never blame you for missing my childhood, never. You're my parents and one of my biggest inspirations. I would never blame you for something that was out of your control, and I will never stop loving you." The two started crying again as they squeezed Peter as hard as they could. He then began to explain his life history. When he spoke about the day of his spider bit him and gave him his powers, he grabbed MJ's hand and said, "Since then we've been doing our best to help people. We went and got training, and eventually joined the ranks of the world's greatest heroes." MJ smiled as she saw Marie's and Richard's faces and blushed a little. "You two are?" Marie smiled as put her hands over her mouth. She then grabbed Richard's arms before saying, "I told you, these kids were destined to be together. Do you remember how cute she was clinging to him all the time as a kid?" MJ blushed harder and buried her face into Peter's shoulder in response to hearing the mother's approval. "I remember, dear," Richard said, patting her hand. "Richard." "Marie." Uncle Ben and Aunt May's voice echoed throughout the room. "Mary." MJ's parents ran over to her and hugged her. "We were so worried." MJ felt a surge of warmth wash over her as she hugged her parents back. Ben hugged his brother while Aunt May's shaky hands touched Marie before they all started to cry. "I'm not hallucinating right now, am I?" Ben questioned, refusing to let go of his brother. "I'm here, Ben. The kid saved us," Richard said as drawing attention to the suits they were wearing. "MJ, what is that?" MJ's parents were shocked, Ben and May too. Mom, Dad, I'm Spider-Woman." "Mary Jane, my daughter, is a hero?" Philip fell to the ground and thought back to when MJ slapped him. It all makes sense now. "And I'm Spider-Man." Peter followed up. May and Ben were still shaking when May shouted, But how? I saw you together with Spider-Man and Spider-Woman. Peter scratched his head. That was us, from another dimension. There is an infinite number of universes where we went down different paths. That version of me was from a universe where MJ and I are married and have a kid. They're a lot older than us too. Everyone was shocked to say the least. I know it's hard to believe, but that little girl was there. She was our daughter from an alternate reality. MJ said with an embarrassed expression. Peter pulled out his phone and showed them the pictures of their trip to another universe. It looks just like New York, but there are definitely some differences. When Peter slid the image on his phone to a family picture they took, everyone saw what they would look like as adults, and their kid whom they thought was the most adorable thing on the planet. Peter then continued, I was told to give my greetings from another Aunt May. I promised her that when I told you my identity, I would say hello to Uncle Ben for her. Everyone was staring at them in silence. So, can you guys say something? You're started to freak me out. MJ said, placing her hands behind her head. Peter, seeing the look of disapproval on most of their faces, decided to show them something before they could say anything. He turned around and then opened a portal back towards Hydra Island. Looking through it, they could see the view at the top of the God Machine. Peter then turned back to his family and said, Speaking of other universes, if you guys want you can come and see some visitors, and watch us save the whole world again, then you can come along. Besides, I think it's best you see what we're capable of, so we don't run into the you're too young argument, because we're not. We're almost adults. 17 and ticking down to 18. Everyone was still shocked as Peter led them through the portal. Seeing the Titanic construct, everyone looked out over the ocean in surprise before they then noticed Peter talking with Dr. Strange. As they began walking over to them, Peter held out his hands and said, Everyone, this is Dr. Stephen Strange, and he is our mentor in magic, and he will be protecting you while MJ and I save the world. What's going on, Peter? MJ asked, staring at the exemplars. She then noticed an almost transparent image of their gods radiating out of their relics, and the form of the spider goddess hovering across from them. Peter then explained his situation, and what was going on here. If we lose, the gods of the Octessence will take control of the world's population and force us into a war that could spell the extinction of humanity. Everyone's faces paled, they wanted to shout, there are no such things as magic and multiple gods. But seeing them with their own eyes, they had no other choice to believe. Peter shook his head before saying, I know you guys think we're too young, but are we really? In less than a year from now, MJ and I will be 18, that's not a very long time. We were given an amazing power, and we trained hard to be worthy of that power. Spider-Man paused as he looked to his father. With great power, comes great responsibility, remember that saying? Ben and Richard sighed when MJ said, We're not really looking for your approval, just your acceptance. We can't shy away from these responsibilities. When we have the power to help people, then we have a moral obligation to take action. MJ's parents looked both proud and extremely worried. Seeing this, Strange pulled out a carpet and stood on it. After chanting some spell phrases, the carpet expanded to fit everyone here. If everyone steps on this, they will be allowed to view the platform outside the God Machine barrier. They will be safe from your battle. Peter then looked to the sky and spoke to the spider goddess. Summon my selection. A beam of light surged as a group of spider heroes appeared in the center of it. My word, it appears I have been summoned to another reality. Richie Parker, Sorcerer Supreme, was the first to speak. What? Who are you guys? Mayday, Parker said in her Nova uniform. Oh hell. Not again. Kane shouted. Well, what do you know, another universe. Been a while since I did this, so who's in charge here? Warlock Peter said, looking around. I sense a great wickedness nearby. Spider-Ghost said, looking at the exemplars like a meal, flaming skull and all. I see, so we've been summoned to save the day. I guess we'll be doing combat with the exemplars. I could just force away from the exemplars, but this isn't my call, is it, Kokiang Woody? Beyonder Peter said, looking up at the spider goddess. If you intervened so, you would only hinder my champion and guardian's progress. I know you're my strongest spider right now, but my champion has more potential than you. So, if you could abide by the rules, I would appreciate it. Kokiang Woody acknowledged the Beyonder spider's power. After all, with the power of the Beyonder, he was even stronger than her right now. The Elder Gods looked at Kokiang Woody in fear as they felt the Beyonder's power radiating from her totem. Well, I don't know about the rest of them, but that one is definitely going to win. One of the Elder Gods scoffed. If only he would become my herald. Another Elder God spouted. Peter walked up to them and said, I'm sorry about bringing you here, but I need your help. He then sent them all telepathic memories to catch them up on the situation. I promise that after this, you will all be returned, but my planet is at stake, so I hope you can forgive me for pulling you here without any warning. Mayday and Richie walked up to Peter and touched his face. Dad! Oh wow, you're so young. MJ walked up beside him and said, Other kids of ours? Peter nodded his head and said, May is our daughter, Richie is my son with another woman named Gwen, and yes, it's the same Gwen you're thinking of. MJ looked shocked as she stared at Richie and then back to Peter with a grumpy expression. Hey, don't look at me like that. It's an entirely different universe. Peter said, waving his hands. Auntie MJ. Richie said, looking at the two. Just so you know, Mary Jane is my woman in this reality, but it's still good to see my kids all grown up to become powerful heroes, Peter explained. The rest of the spiders came over and started to chat for a bit. If you guys want, you can say hello to our family before we get this started. I know how much it would mean to you all, Peter said, pointing to their family. May and Richie ran over shouting, Grandma, Grandpa, Auntie, Uncle. The Parker and Watson family were blown away by their otherworld relatives. The group started talking to them, and after a while, they began to accept them as their own. The remaining Spider-Men that were Peter Parker, all except for the Scarlet Spider and Ghost Spider, talked to their relatives with tears in their eyes. The Elder God stared at them before saying, Time is up, let the challenge begin. Chapter 60. Issue 60. Secret Wars Part 10. The spiders huddled up as they discussed who'd fought who. The Elder Gods seemed to be losing their patience when the Spider-Men and Spider-Women stood side by side against the ones they were facing. Champion Peter v.S. Juggernaut. Guardian MJ v.S. Inferno. Nova Star Mayday v.S. Mordred. Warlock Spider v.S. Stonecutter. Ghost Spider v.S. Mysterio. Beyonder Spider v.S. Styx. Richie v.S. Gorgon. Kane v.S. Craven the Hunter. Peter went up first. He stared down Juggernaut and said, I guess I should finish what I started. Spider-Man cracked his knuckles as he stepped up to Juggernaut. The giant looked down at him with a wicked grin and said, You think you can take me? Not too different than fighting a bull, so yeah, I think I can beat you. Peter responded with a grin on his face. The Elder Gods suddenly shouted for them to begin. Peter took off running. He jumped up towards his target, getting him up close so he could prevent Juggernaut from gaining any momentum. He punched out and caused the wind cracked around his fist. Yet the Juggernaut showed no fear. He simply smiled and countered with a punch of his own. The two's fist touched and sent out a large shock wave of kinetic energy. Peter felt every bone in his arm shatter as it shot back from the recoil. However, he then grinned as if just figured something out while he stimulated his chi to heal the wound almost instantly. The two then started to exchange punches. Blow after blow, the ground shook every time they made contact. With his symbiote, enhanced body, and the full force of his chi instilled into his attacks, Peter was punching harder than he ever had before. He used his electric form to turn his arms into lightning to kick it up another level. With insane speed and reaction timing, Spider-Man started to dodge Juggernaut attacks and danced around him as if he were moving in slow motion. Peter hit him with all of his strength that light speed punches could produce. Juggernaut grunted in pain when he suddenly slammed his fist into the ground, shaking not only the God Machine Tower but the earth below them as well. Even Peter was blown back by the cataclysmic force. Thinking that he had gotten some room to maneuver, Juggernaut tried to charge forward. However, Peter webbed his eyes and pulled himself over before he stared, punching him again. Every blow created sonic booms and rattled the sky and ground, forcing Juggernaut stagger back constantly. Hoping to make it stop, the Juggernaut swung blindly, opening up his sternum. Peter then activated his power ruby, and for the first time in the fight, he stopped Juggernaut's fist. The villain pulled the webbing from his eyes and ran forward in a blind rage. The two began to brawl again. Punch after punch, blow after blow, the two both felt their bodies shake in pain through every impact. They were moving so quickly that for normal humans, it was impossible to spot with the naked eye. Juggernaut was surprised that he could feel anything being beat into him, let alone the fact it was coming from a tiny person like Peter. Spider-Man webbed his face again and charged all the remaining time and energy from the power ruby into his leg. The space around his foot started to warp as he kicked Juggernaut in the nuts as hard as he could. As it landed, the force from the attack shot up dramatically, and the force from the Merlin gem shattered through the power of the Elder God long enough to land the blow. All the men promptly placed their hands over their groins and winced in pain. Oh, right in the Juggernauts, Mayday said while making the other Peters laugh as they thought, That's my girl. Aunt May, MJ, and his mother scolded her brash language, all the while trying to hold in their laughter. While the rest of the spiders started laughing at the situation, the broken-balled Juggernaut, however, didn't find it funny at all. After all, he was kicked in the nads by a fraction of the entire universe's force. The face of the armored brute paled as he fell to his knees while Peter grabbed the last latch on his helmet and pulled it off. He then stared into Juggernaut's mind and practically shouted the command, "Sleep!" which was accompanied by a might psychic blast. Peter laughed as he stared at the helmet in his hand and the brute fell over, snoozing like a newborn baby. "I win!" the champion totem declared as he hopped over to the flying carpet and was crowded by his family's worried stares. "Peter, you're not hurt, are you?" May and his mother checked him over. Spider-Man raised his hands up and said, "Even if he managed to kill me, it's not like I'd stay dead for very long. They'd have to disintegrate my entire body or brain in order to kill me." Peter explained that he had a healing factor and so did MJ. Seeing that they didn't know how to respond, Peter chuckled and said, "I think you guys should be happy. You're all part of a very small group of family members that don't have to worry about the physical well-being of your children." The family did have to admit, it made them feel a lot better knowing their kids were semi-immortals, but they still didn't like the thought of them getting hurt. However, after seeing Peter's strength firsthand, they knew they could do nothing about it. "Oh yeah." Peter pulled out a ring that had his Spider-Man suits. Hee. "After I gave one to my other self, I thought that you guys should have something to protect yourselves in case of danger. I made like 30 or so, no skin off my back." Peter also handed over a bunch of web shooters. "These are gifts so you guys can stay safe when we're not around. After this whole ordeal, I think life's going to be a little hectic for a while." Peter explained what the suits did, and when they all looked a little excited, Philip looked at the ring and mumbled to himself, "From cop to Spider Cop? Hey, that's my joke name. You know what? You can have it." Peter crossed his arms. "Good match," MJ said, placing her face out and pointed to her cheeks. "For luck?" Peter smiled and gave her a kiss before saying, "Good luck, honey." Richie and May made a yuck noise and shook off the weird feeling of watching someone he considered his aunt kissing a younger version of his dad. However, he then smiled before shouting with the rest of the group, "Go get her mom/Auntie MJ." The rest of the Spider-Men chuckled as they cheered on 891,211 Mary Jane. When all of a sudden, everyone but Kane shouted, "You can do it, babe!" Peter gave all of the other versions of himself that were married to MJ a glare and watched them laugh at him. The champion totem then shook his head back with a gesture that yelled, "What can you do about it?" MJ was facing down Inferno with a grin on her face. The match began as Inferno charged up a bright energy and turned the top of the God Machine into a laser light show. MJ dodged through them effortlessly when she webbed her legs and pulled them out from under her. Inferno countered by sending up a charge of deadly energy up the web line. However, MJ released the webbing and shot off dozens of web cannons made from her suit, each producing a different element. "It's all energy. Do you think I can't control it?" Inferno asked as she started to absorb the energy. However, MJ didn't stop. She continued to push the limits of Inferno's capacity as the bombardment of elemental web pellet explosions made contact with her body. Seeing Inferno starting to lose control, MJ went into strike, but as she got close her spider senses went off, warning her of danger. Webbing the ground behind her, she pulled herself back as Inferno's body exploded with a surge of energy. MJ suddenly felt the shock wave from the explosion rattle her insides. She swallowed a mouthful of blood seconds before she used her telekinesis to create a dome of force that shielded her from damage and started to close in on it. MJ was using the kinetic energy of the explosion to not only contain the explosion, but add it to the shield's power by controlling the direction the force was flowing. Inferno was shocked as she felt the space in which she could project energy within became less and less. She was suddenly lifted into the air and surrounded by parts made from the God Machine. Without hesitating, MJ started channeling Forge's ability. She didn't know how she was building exactly, but she knew what she was building it by letting her senses and instincts guide her. Stonecutter was stunned that someone could manipulate and create something from his technology. Then, as if he figured something out, the Herald gave a shocked look and stared at Peter with a look of pure and intense anger. Stonecutter looked to the remaining fighters chosen to fight them and thought that they were all probably perfect counters for their abilities. "You know energy's biggest enemy? Containment." Spider-Woman laughed. The machine she made finished compacting Inferno into a bead-sized sphere before she grabbed it in her fist and said, "I win." MJ walked back to the carpet and stood next to her family as they all cheered her on. "That was amazing," Richie shouted. "Incredible." Mayday followed up. "Spectacular," Warlock Spider laughed. Peter came up to her and gave her a hug and said, "I have the ultimate MJ as my wife, so I knew you could do it." MJ smiled as she looked to Mayday and asked, "Can you do it?" Mayday smiled before saying, "I can handle myself, Mom. It's not the first time I fought an exemplar." She flew over to landing next to Mordred. Do you know why my dad picked me to fight you? Mordred lifted his brow and smiled back at her before saying, Sure, why not? Because I've already defeated you before. A glow of golden energy surrounded her as the elder gods shouted, Begin! Mayday shot after Mordred as they two began exchanging spell and nova energies at each other. Winds of Watum. A whirlwind of air circled around her. However, Mayday didn't panic and let the blades of wind crash against her armor. She swung her hands in the opposite direction, shattering the tornado. Before the winds could die down, Mayday's leg was captured by a crimson band of Sidorak and was pulled towards him. Nova Spider stopped in mid-air as she started to pull back. Jets of intensely powerful energy radiated from her lower half, pushing her further and further away, when all of the sudden, a few dozen giant spears that were made of energy shot out from dozens of floating spell circles surrounding Mordred. Mayday laughed as she suddenly turned around and charged towards Mordred. Throwing out her hands, she started webbing up the spears with a strange nova energy type of webbing. Once they were safely secured, her body flexed, and all her muscles bulged slightly as she tossed all of the radiant spears back at him. In response to the attack, Mordred dispelled his spears and tried to toss her aside with his bands of Sidorak. Before he could complete his train of thought, a bolt of nova energy shot at him with incredible accuracy and speed. The herald raised up his hands, making a force field to defend against the attack while dropping his crimson bands of Sidorak in the process. As the nova bolt hit him, without any warning, the blast turned into a line of webbing that quickly enveloped the bubble of force the spellcaster made. She then lifted it up and began to swing it around in circles. Mordred created a portal and hopped out of the space and attempted to cleave Mayday's head off with an energy sword. However, Mayday's spider sense went off before she shot out a ray of nova force energy from her back, striking Mordred with a powerful enough blast that sent him flying away. Another portal opened up as he reappeared above her and he shouted, Waterfall of Watum. A geyser of water that radiated an aura of death shot after Mayday, engulfing her in an intense pressure until it felt like she was trying to escape from the gravity of a star. However, she wouldn't give in. Mayday raised her arms as a supermassive burst of golden nova light shot out of her entire body, radiating in every direction and destroying the mystical waters by completely evaporating everything within her surroundings. She charged at Mordred and hit him in the gut with a Superman punch using the full weight of a star behind her blow. Mordred coughed up a mouth full of blood and the pain was intense enough to scatter his thoughts, thus giving the Spider Nova a chance to make energy webbing that filled his mouth and nostrils. She continued to weave countless threads that came from every part of her body, wrapping him up down to the smallest finger while making it so he couldn't so much as flinch. She then sealed up the defeated Mordred and said, I caught an evil wizard, now to get my red slippers and go home. Heading back to the rest of the group, Mayday had a huge grin on her face that said that was too easy. Like before, the other spiders and her family all shouted cheers of victory. The elder gods were all positively furious. They looked to the remaining people and knew the odds were stacked against them, so against their better judgment, they gave their heralds another fraction of their power. Warlock Spider-Man headed out and stared at Stonecutter. Unlike the usual Spider-Man suit, his stood out as it was golden webs on a black base and had many shining technological-looking lines running through it. Warlock smiled at his opponent and said, I'm curious to see what your technology is like. Stonecutter smiled as he took control of the entire God Tower and started to create giant cannons that targeted the Warlock Spider. However, in response to the looming threat, the hero just smiled and said, You know, you remind me of something. You wouldn't happen to be related to my pet rock by any chance? Stonecutter frowned as he sat in a turret and started shooting powerful blasts of disintegration energy at him. Warlock Spider jumped around, letting the beams strike the tower, which would self-repair the damage seconds after being inflicted. Before they healed and without Stonecutter noticing, Warlock Spider-Man started to infect the tower's internal mechanics. Suddenly the tower shifted, crushing Warlock Spider-Man in between two strange devices that created a force field. Ha ha ha! I win! Stonecutter shouted when everyone except for Peter and Beyonder Spider-Man yelled out in horror. Only these two shook their heads with a bored expression, knowing full well that wasn't enough to stop Warlock Spider-Man. He's not that easy to kill, Peter said, pointing up. Stonecutter saw that the entire dome around them was surrounded. Golden flakes of dust swirled and completely encapsulated the God Machine. The flakes settled into his machinery and spread throughout his tower. And then, it eventually landed on his suit. Hey, this is pretty cool stuff, I'ma take it. Warlock Spider-Man shouted as his voice echoed throughout the battlefield. Suddenly the suit he was wearing and the whole tower turned golden before it was taken over and possessed by Warlock Spider-Man. Next, a group of machine parts were taken from the tower and started to create a similar prison that MJ made out of the God Machine. After creating the tech to seal Stonecutter's powers, he was stuck in a box of stone with no windows or air openings. Since he was a herald, he didn't need air or anything to live. As long as they are empowered by the elder gods, they are pretty much immortal, so he didn't have to worry about the guy croaking in there. Warlock Spider-Man's particles then gathered together and reformed into his body as he said, "I win." Warlock Spider patted his shoulders with closed fists as he said, "I know I can't die through normal means, but it still hurts like hell to have my body split up like that." Everyone who thought he had died was more than shocked as he landed over next to them. All they could do was stare at him in disbelief. "What? Do I have something on face?" Everyone shook their heads, while Peter grumbled, "Omega level beings are a bitch to kill. Freaking super web magic, I have to learn some of that."